What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm so honored to have back on the show once again LDS Abuse whistleblower, survivor, investigative researcher, journalist, and reporter, creator of LDS Abuse, excommunicated, lifelong member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, loving father, nature lover, and a man on a mission to help members of the spiritual body known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints know what to expect from their church if they become victims of abuse. Justin Riggs, aka LDS Abuse, if you guys follow him on social media. On our last two episodes, Justin took us on a deep dive into the heart of institutional failure and the hidden structures that protect it. We first examined the case of Gordon Bowen, a world-famous advertising executive whose alleged patterns of abuse, financial misconduct, and decades-long ties to top LDS church leaders revealed a system prioritizing brand protection over victims. Through court documents, journals, and public records, Justin traced how an abuser remained connected to apostles and prophets even after excommunication, while survivors were left without recourse. We then expanded that conversation into the deeper roots, the quasi-religious secret societies, fraternities like Sigma Chi and Pi Kappa Alpha, Skull and Bones chapters, and patronage networks that have infiltrated Utah's elite and church leadership for over a century. From humiliation rituals and death oaths to the Black Supper and the pipeline of power, influence, and gain, we explored how these systems condition compromise, enable cover-ups, and make justice for survivors so elusive. These themes, ritual abuse allegations, historical infiltration, and the prioritization of secrecy over the vulnerable have been the foundation of Justin's recent work. Today, we build on that conversation even more, continuing to connect the dots with the same relentless, evidence-based courage that has defined Justin's journey. At the center of it all stands Justin, also known online as LDS Abuse, a singular voice for truth whose life story is both a profound personal odyssey and a beacon of hope for every survivor still searching for light in the darkness. Justin's path began in the quiet corridors of personal curiosity. A lifelong member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he once sought simply to understand how good people could fail victims of abuse. That curiosity quickly evolved into a rigorous, evidence-based mission, and his research extends far beyond individual cases. He's built a public archive of evidence that empowers others to see the patterns for themselves. This relentless pursuit came at great personal cost. His work led to his excommunication from the church he had known his entire life. Yet he continues, driven by the unshakable conviction that sunlight is the best disinfectant and that secrets only allow abuse to metastasize. Justin's work has connected the dots between ritual abuse allegations, historical infiltration efforts, and the LDS Corporation's prioritization of brand protection. He's revealed a system where victims are funneled into therapy modalities that undermine legal recourse, and where even prophets and apostles have been implicated in shielding perpetrators. Through painstaking documentation, he has transformed private pain into public knowledge, given a voice to the voiceless, and offered a roadmap for accountability. What makes Justin truly awe-inspiring is not only the depth of his research or the courage to expose even his own family's pain. It is the profound humanity that burns beneath the fire. He speaks of chain breakers, and he believes in a God of both justice and mercy. He weeps with survivors, fights alongside them, and extends grace even when it has costed him personally. He stands as a model of intellectual courage and moral clarity, a survivor who refused to stay silent, a researcher who turned personal cost into collective light, a warrior whose unwavering stand continues to remind us that one dedicated soul, armed with evidence and fierce love for the vulnerable, can help break the chains for generations yet to come. His courage continues to shift what is possible. His humanity continues to heal. And his story continues to inspire every one of us to stand a little taller, to speak a little louder, and to refuse to look away. So, you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, writer, creator, business owner, and content creator, survivor and whistleblower, survivor and victim advocate, voice for the voiceless, courageous warrior, passionate purveyor of truth, and someone I believe to be one of the greatest researchers and journalists of our time, the one, the only, Justin Riggs. Justin, it is great to have you back today. Thank you for joining us for another episode.
Hey, Emma, thank you so much for having me again. I really appreciate the opportunity to come back and continue this conversation that we've been having. I think today's show is going to be really, really difficult, but also really eye-opening for people to understand how this system actually works. And so I'm grateful for that wonderful, as always, introduction. So I just, whenever I'm feeling down, I just book a show with you, and I know I'll feel better about myself right away. So, but thanks for having me on. So, I do have a ton of information today, Emma. So it'd probably be best if we just hop in, and I'll just start rolling here, and we'll see if we can get this done in a way that gets all that information out, but also doesn't take up too much of people's time. So, so today I have titled our show "The Slaughterhouse of Israel." How litigation economics turns children of God into adversaries of the church. And to sort of set the stage for people, I want to talk a little bit about what we've talked about in the last couple of shows, which is we've identified sort of this layer of leadership that joined quasi-religious secret societies that, force their initiates to engage in humiliation rituals, shame bonding, and mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical abuse. And that's an important part of the system, but you can't run a worldwide organization based off of a few occultists, right? And so what occultists will do once they have sort of made their oaths is that they need they need several layers underneath them in order to run these organizations. And today, what we're going to talk about is what I sort of consider this bureaucratic layer underneath them that views these men as literal prophets of God and would do anything to protect those men. And they do so believing that they're doing the right thing, right? And I think that's really important as we go through today's story to understand that these aren't wicked men meeting in smoke-filled rooms, deciding how to ruin the lives of abuse victims. What we have is a group of occultists utilizing a group of bureaucrats who sincerely believe that they're doing the Lord's work in what they do. But I think we're going to show very clearly today that these are not representatives of Jesus Christ in their own words. Okay, so today what we're talking about is the church's law firm, and they are. It's the name of the law firm is Curtin McConkie. It used to be Curtin McConkie Pullman, and still until the Pullman part of that law firm got caught soliciting a prostitute in downtown Salt Lake City, and he had his name removed from the marquee. So now it's just Curtin McConkie. But the church's law firm has been Curtin McConkie for decades and decades, and it's kind of an iron fortress. But after the last couple of shows that we did, I was fortunate in that I had an abuse victim reach out to me, and she had actually sued Curtin McConkie, and she was able to depose a man that we're going to talk about by the name of Randy Austin. And we'll talk about who Randy Austin here is in a second, but we're going to have a real insider's look at how the church's law firm handles abuse cases and abuse victims. And we're going to compare and contrast that to how they say that they handle things versus how they actually handle things. And we know this because Randy Austin had to testify for this court case in which his law firm and he himself was sued. So to set the stage, we're talking about a little part of Utah called Bluffdale, Utah. And Bluffdale is a place, it's an interesting place in the United States because it's a place where those who you would think of as Mormons, what I call the Brighamites, that's the biggest group of Mormons, they mingle freely with this other group of fundamentalist Mormons that practice polygamy called the Apostolic United Brethren. And I just want to point out that, like, unlike many polygamous groups, the AUB they try to live what this screen says, more integrated lives within normal municipal boundaries. So unlike a lot of these other polygamous groups that are like really way out there and they don't mingle with other people, the AUB very much mingles with sort of what we would consider like common society, right? And so where these abuse cases that we're going to talk about today allegedly occurred is in Bluffdale, Utah. Okay, so very unique setting and situation. I also need to set the stage here by talking about what was happening around the time that this abuse victim reached out to Curtin McConkie and Randy Austin. So in September of 2001, there was a really big lawsuit against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in this lawsuit, the church was being sued for something like $1.5 billion. And in the end, the church settles for $3 million. Okay. And here's sort of what was going on. It says Jeffrey Anderson, attorney for plaintiff Jeremiah Scott, told the Deseret News on Wednesday that he believes church officials settled out of court in the case because from our point of view, it's obvious they faced very serious and grave liability concerns, and they would be held legally responsible for the sexual abuse that Scott suffered at the hands of church member Franklin Curtis. I'm going to skip down. It says the church has vigorously denied any legal liability in the case, saying Tuesday it was settling the lawsuit based on, quote, litigation economics, end quote, alone. And I want to pause and talk a little bit about this litigation economics, okay? So for those who aren't involved with the legal system, especially with large organizations that get sued quite often, these organizations have to make these decisions sometimes not based on what's true and what's false, but just on how much it's going to cost them, okay, to defend a case or to prosecute a case or those kinds of things. And so litigation economics is it's very well understood practice inside the practice of law, but it is sort of odd to see a church that should be focused on truth focusing on this litigation economics. And what we're going to see today in these cases is just how much litigation economics plays a role in the decisions of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Curtin McConkie as they decide how to help abuse victims. Okay. So this is in September of 2001 when this settlement happens. And of course, as it makes its way through the media, people are noticing. And this former Bluffdale resident by the name of Michelle Nielsen, who's done a show with Jason and Alexia Preston on We Are the People Utah that people can watch. She sees that this has happened, and she realizes that the abuse that she suffered was actually worse than what she had seen in the Scott case. And so she decides that she wants to reach out to somebody who represents the church. Okay. And I want to stop here for just a second, because as we set the stage here, it's really critical for people to understand a couple of things. First of all, when you're an abuse victim, it really, really traumatizes you and messes with you in ways that are very difficult to explain to people who have never gone through it. And so as I tell this story today, I want people to understand and recognize that the women that I'm discussing are very open about the fact that they were deeply traumatized, deeply hurt, deeply wounded. They'd already been through decades of trying to get people to listen to them. They'd worked with local priesthood leaders and tried to get help there. That hadn't happened. And so when they see that the church is willing to settle a case, they go to Curtin McConkie thinking that they're meeting with somebody who represents the church, right?
So some of the thing who I've reported to, I've reported to bishops, I've reported to stake presidents, I've had sanctions put against me on some of those. And they've always apologized to me after they were released, saying they had to do what they were told. Now, this comes from Curtin and McConkie.
Do tell.
I have, oh, yeah. Okay. So,
Kirk and McConkie is the church's law firm that silences many, many victims.
Oh, yeah. So I don't know why I did this, but I had heard about a lawsuit of some victims in the Boy Scouts. So I knew that there were things, that they'd gotten settlements for. Now, the reason I did this, I wasn't doing very well. I was not functioning very well, especially after these flashbacks were coming back. The divorce, I had 4 little kids that were 4, 6, 8, and 10 when it happened. And I had to take care of them all by myself because my ex-husband went to back to California. I was taking care of him, and I wasn't getting child support and alimony after that for a while. So I was really hurting. So I thought, who can help me? I need some help. I need some financial help. Oh, because, by the way, I had talked to the bishops when I had these flashbacks when I moved. Now, this is when I moved to Magna. The first bishop believed me because I didn't tell him what had happened. I just moved there and I told him that I needed a blessing because I was struggling. I didn't want to tell him. I was too scared because I didn't know what bishops were involved or whatnot, right? So he gave me this blessing, and 3 different times in that blessing, he told me that I had been the victim of many cruel and terrible things of the last days.
Wow.
3 different times, and I hadn't told him anything.
Wow.
So I decided I could confide in him. So when I told him what had happened, he believed me, and he really wanted to help me.
Good for him.
And he had studied, and he cried with me.
And I think it's important to highlight that there are some very good bishops, stake presidents. There are some very phenomenal, men and women in the church, inspired.
Yeah, there are. And I know about the others too. So I know both. That's why I'm saying I know both. But so he helped me, but he wasn't only in there for a short time. And then some others got in, and they were either kind of more apathetic or they kind of were upset at me for talking about it. Because at that time is when I became a massage therapist. I was working on a client. He was a lawyer. I was telling him what happened. And he said, "Have you heard of the Glenn Pace memo?" Now, I know you've talked about that. And I said, "No, I hadn't heard of it." So he said, "You need to read it." And so I read it, and I was like, "Oh my word, this is what happened to me. This is what happened to me. This is what happened to me." I mean, it was so incredible. I love Glenn Pace because another leader that believed it and wanted to do something about it. So I actually talked to his secretary, and he would relay messages back and forth to me, and he was praying for me and all the victims. Anyway, he was a good guy. And so that was just another validation. And so I started telling people in my ward and community, "You got to read the Glenn Pace memo." And I was trying to get it all known and made, and I was telling my bishops and stake president knew it. And so, sorry, I'm laughing because it's so sad. And I sometimes laugh when things are sad, sorry. But anyway, so they told me not to do it anymore. Do not talk about this. I was trying to be silenced. So I was released from some of my callings, and I asked my bishop, "Why is this going on? I'm not given another calling." I had a few callings, and he said, "Okay, I shouldn't tell you this," but he says, "Your name is on a file, red tagged."
The Strengthening Members Committee.
Yes, okay, right. And so, exactly. And so I was made to look like a bad guy when I'm the victim. And this is kind of the anger and the upset frustration that I get, is because why would they re-victimize somebody that had already been victimized? So I had to go, it was very hard, very difficult. Temple recommend held this whole thing like.
Oh, they held your temple recommend.
Oh, yeah. But anyway, for a while, that wasn't even long, but the callings, I was released. And then later the bishop told me that he had to do that. And then when they got released, they would all apologize to me.
You can see here in the deposition, it says, "Now with regard to your first becoming acquainted with the name Michelle Nielsen." And Randy Austin says, "Uh-huh." The lawyer says, "When did that occur?" Austin says, "That would have been in the middle part of December of 2001. I got a message from my secretary, Sarah Campbell, that Michelle had called our office. How she was routed there, I'm not certain, but she had called our office, indicated she had read a newspaper article, knew about a case that had been resolved in Oregon in the recent past, had the names of a couple of plaintiffs' lawyers, Tim Kosnoff and David Slater, and wanted to talk with somebody who represented the church." Now, this language of representing the church is very interesting because there's a couple different ways that you can represent the church, right? A bishop represents the church, but he's a lay leader and he's representing Jesus Christ. Randy Austin, as we're going to see, he represents the church, but in a very specific and narrow way. And that very specific and narrow way is that he represents them as a lawyer, meaning that his job is to protect the interests of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, not the interests of abuse victims who want to come in and talk to somebody who represents the church. And so right off the bat, we sort of see lawyers get a bad rap, and I think they get a bad rap for a good reason, because it's this kind of thing that lawyers do. Randy Austin will say, oh, yes, I represent the church. But what he won't tell this traumatized abuse victim is that I represent the church in a way that makes you an adversary of the church. And I'm going to do everything I can to protect my client, not you as an abuse victim. And we're going to see that extremely clearly as we go throughout this. Okay. So to give everybody an idea of who Randy Austin is, this is not just a lawyer at Curtin McConkie. Randy Austin is one of the lawyers who was present when the church spun up their abuse hotline in 1995. He's also the one that the church sends out to talk about the abuse hotline when they need somebody to try to get some good press for it. And so what we have here is an article from a couple years ago, or actually just like last year, almost exactly a year ago. Randy Austin went to a conference put on by FAIR LDS, which is Faithful Answers Informed Response. And he gave a talk along with a therapist about the abuse hotline, where he says this is as valuable a tool as exists in the world to protect children. Okay. And again, I just want to point out like that everything Randy Austin says is ostensibly true, like in a very narrow sense. Like lawyers are extremely good at speaking very narrowly and saying things that are true, but not necessarily the whole truth or anything but the truth. And Randy Austin is a really good example of this, because what we're going to see is perhaps the LDS Abuse Hotline is as valuable a tool as exists in the world to protect children, but we're going to see what happens if you come to the LDS Abuse Hotline when you're not a child, and therefore you're not as much of a threat to the church's image and assets. And we're going to see how they treat you when you're not necessarily a child. And I think there are a lot of people who would argue, including myself, that the LDS Abuse Hotline is not as valuable a tool as exists in the world to protect children, but I'm going to leave that for a different time. The only other thing I want to point out here is that's really interesting is you have three really interesting entities in this picture. You have Randy Austin, whose entire job is to protect the interests and assets of the Church of Jesus, the corporation known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You have FAIR LDS, which is a well-known apologist organization that quite often ignores historical documents in order to make the points that they want to make. And then you have this guy, Tad Walsh, who's a reporter for the Deseret News, who, if people have watched my other shows, they'll realize that Tad Walsh is the same guy who wrote articles about the Brenda Miles case, in which he failed to ever name the diagnosed pedophile who was abusing children, or the fact that those children had been examined by doctors and had physical evidence of abuse that had taken place. So you have sort of a trifecta here of people who are very willing to lie for the Lord. Okay. That's sort of a saying inside the church, is lying for the Lord. And right here you have sort of the Father, the Son, and the Ghost of organizations and individuals who are willing to lie for the Lord. Okay. All working together. So, so Michelle comes in December, or she calls in December, and she demands to meet with Randy Austin face to face. And as she's going through this process, Randy sort of tells her, yeah, like, we really want to help you, and we're going to begin this investigation. Okay. And so this is just from the deposition. Randy says, well, when you say anything other than yes, I did tell her I was going to investigate. I was going to talk to the people she talked to. And once again, I had her story and their evidence. That's what we would do. And I get back to her with their response, which is what I did. And what you have here is a very confusing situation for Michelle, because she's going to somebody that she views as Brother Randy Austin, right? Inside the church, we call everybody brother and sister. And so she thinks she's going to see a representative of the church named Brother Randy Austin, who's telling her that the church wants to help her, okay, and that they're going to help her by conducting an investigation, and that he's then going to take what they learn to a committee and decide whether or not to help Michelle financially, okay, in this case. So what I want to do is I'm going to stop our story here, and I'm going to jump over to another timeline, and we're going to take a very deep dive into what this quote unquote investigation looked like and who it was actually serving, and whether or not this law firm is set up to help abuse victims or somebody else altogether. Okay. So just to establish that we're dealing off of an actual deposition, here's a screenshot of the front page. Okay. From 7/22/2008. So 7 years after Michelle went in, or 6 years after Michelle went in to Curtin McConkie to get help. Michelle sues Kurt and McConkie for the way that they handled the situation. And Randy Austin, right here, gets deposed from Kurt and McConkie at the law offices of Strong and Haney, I guess. I'm not sure how to say that. Okay. But we're dealing off an official legal document, an official deposition in case number 070907331, overseen by Judge Denise P. Landenberg. So again, I want to go back to sort of the position that the church is in. In September of 2001, they had to settle for $3 million in this case because they had just lost a suit to Tim Kosnoff, or settled a suit with Tim Kosnoff, I should say, because the church had been found, the allegation was that the church knew about an abuser that they then let have access to another child. And the big thing about this legal battle is that in early 2001, a judge had ordered the LDS Church to release internal sex abuse files and disciplinary records. Okay. And so the church says that they were doing this due to litigation economics. I would propose that they really just didn't want these documents to ever be seen. We see this also in the Department of Homeland Security investigation that got shut down related to David Hamblin, where once the lawyers get the idea that, hey, we can sue Kurt and McConkie and we can crack open those documents, all of a sudden the church is much more willing to talk and settle than when they're not being ordered to release internal files and disciplinary records. Okay. So that's part of litigation economics, is understanding what is it we're going to have to give up if we move forward with this litigation. Okay. Now, I want to talk really quickly about how Randy very first deals with Michelle, and I want to rope in some of my experience working with the abuse hotline. I have not talked about my experience very much, but I'm going to give a little bit of information, because one of the reasons that this story makes so much sense to me is that what Michelle Nielsen and Gina Pemberton tell me happened is very much what happened to me when I tried to get help from the abuse hotline. And so now we sort of have three witnesses about this. So in my experience, I went to request help from a Kurt and McConkie lawyer by the name of Matt Ballard, who is the grandson of former Apostle M. Russell Ballard. And I had worked with Matt Ballard on an abuse case in the ward that I was in. And he had said, look, anytime you need any help, please reach out and ask me. And so when I decided to take my domestic violence claims to the church through Kurt and McConkie, I reached out directly to Matt Ballard. And here's how he answered my email. So you can see that this is Matthew Ballard writing to me. And he says, Justin, given that I represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its leaders only, I am unable to represent rank and file church members. I am therefore respectfully declining your request for me to represent you, which is weird because I never asked him to represent me. I was asking him for help to understand what resources were available to me to take my claims of domestic and other types of abuse up through the church hierarchy. Okay. But he automatically goes into this mode of, I represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I'm unable to represent you. And the only reason I want to point that out is that it's exactly what happens to Michelle Nielsen when she goes in to meet with Randy Austin. Randy Austin says, first question that I asked her, because she had left the names of specific lawyers, I needed to be very, very clear with her. I explained who I was, identified myself, Randy Austin. I was an attorney at Curtin and McConkie. And then he uses this language again. I represented the church, which is the reason she had called. And I just want to point out that that is not the reason she had called. When Michelle Nielsen says that she wants to meet with somebody who represents the church, she means she wants to talk to somebody who represents Jesus Christ, okay? Somebody ecclesiastical. But Randy Austin uses this term represented, and he says, oh, I represent the church. But the way that he represents the church is completely different than the way that Michelle Nielsen would have understood that term. But he begins checking off sort of what I call like the lawyer checklist right away. And so what he's doing here is he's setting, as a lawyer, he's setting himself up in a place where everything he's going to do is legal, but what I would say is not necessarily moral or ethical. Okay. So who is it that Kurt McConkie is there to protect? Whose interests is Kurt McConkie there to protect? It's clearly not the victims. And Randy says that very directly. He says, I'm there to make certain that my clients, meaning the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, okay, I'm there to make certain that my clients' interests are protected as best they possibly can be. And the obvious question becomes, if somebody's coming in to tell you an abuse case that might be a situation where your client is liable for damages, how can you possibly represent the interests of the abuse victim as well as the interests of your client? And the answer is you can't. You can't possibly do that. And Randy Austin knows that very well. But what you're going to see is he very carefully reels her in and draws her into a system that I call the slaughterhouse, okay? Because I really think what they're doing here is taking children of God, right, lambs of God, and they're moving through a system where they eventually end up slaughtering them, okay? Whether it's spiritually, emotionally, mentally. And then sometimes, unfortunately, we see cases where people end up committing suicide after working with places like Kurt and McConkie because they just can't handle being drug into a situation like this, thinking that they're dealing with people who represent Jesus Christ and finding out that they're people who represent the interests of their adversary, the people liable for the damages that they experienced as an abuse victim, okay? So let's point out that Randy Austin understands that in this case, Michelle Nielsen represents an adversarial interest, okay? In the deposition, he says, I understood she was coming in because she indicated she had been harmed, had a potential claim against the church, i.e. his client, and wanted to talk to somebody, okay? So unlike Michelle, who thinks that she's coming into a warm, inviting, supportive environment to tell her story and hopefully get some help for her and her 4 children, okay? Her husband had left. She had 4 children all by herself. She was traumatized. She was struggling to make ends meet. She was struggling to just live life. But unlike Michelle Nielsen, who thought she was coming into a safe place, Randy Austin clearly understands from the get-go that he's dealing with somebody who has a potential claim against his client. And everything he does from that moment forward is to protect the interests of his client, not the interests of the abuse victim who came to him for help. Okay? I want to point out, like, the attitude or the position that Michelle was coming in, right? She was not there angry. She was not there wanting to sue the church. She was not there making threats or demands. In fact, that gets like in the deposition itself, Randy Austin starts talking about the demands that Michelle is making, and her lawyer, a man by the name of Burton, points out and says, Michelle never made any demands. And Randy Austin has to back off and acknowledge that, yeah, like, that's not like why she was there. Here's why she was there. He says, there's a reason I didn't say that is because she seemed very reluctant to go to a lawyer. And then Burton says, well, she was. And Austin finishes his answer, for a variety of reasons. And then the lawyer asks, all right, why? What variety? And Randy Austin answers, you'd have to ask her. I don't know that. But what I want to point out is that Michelle Nielsen didn't show up with an army of lawyers behind her threatening to sue the church. She saw an article. She saw an abuse case that was settled for a certain amount. She compared that to the abuse that she had gone through. She came up with an amount that she felt comfortable asking for. And she went to the church thinking that she was talking to reasonable people who would look at her case in the same way that they had looked at the Scott case, not understanding that the church had made the decision in the Scott case, not because they felt guilt for what had happened, not because they felt bad for the child who had been abused, but because of litigation economics, they had made an economic decision to settle that case for $3 million. So Michelle is now in a really bad situation where she's in the shark tank with the shark, thinking that she's like in a warm barn being ready to be taken care of. And the lawyer, the shark, just is going to start circling her, or the wolf in sheep's clothing, however you want to visualize that in your head. But she's already drawn in, and she's already volunteered the information to her adversary that she doesn't want to hire a lawyer. She wants to resolve this the way that the church teaches that we resolve that. And that's another thing that people need to understand. So many times I talk to abuse victims, and they honestly believe that they're trying to resolve their claim with the church the way that God has taught them to resolve the claim. While the church is using the methods of the world to resolve claims, members of the church who are abused are trying to resolve these claims through the way that the scriptures have taught them. Okay? And when you go in that way, you're already on your back foot, because we're not dealing with people who care about how God wants you to resolve this. They just want to protect the image and assets of their client, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. On January 30th or around January 30th, Michelle gets to go and see Randy Austin personally. And this is different, okay? Randy Austin talks about in the deposition that it's not very often that he lets somebody come in person to meet with him. And we have to ask ourselves, well, why? Why did the gate swing open for Michelle Nielsen when for everybody else that gate gets slammed shut? And I think the obvious answer here is that Michelle was asking for $5 million, okay? They had just settled for $3 million. Michelle was asking for $5 million. And so I think that they recognized that this was a potentially huge case against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so Randy Austin, sort of in this like, aw shucks, I'm a priesthood holder, we're going to help you. The church really wants to help you. He swings the gate open and invites this sheep into the slaughterhouse and says, okay, I'm going to let you come and meet me, even though I don't do that very often. Okay, he says, we met towards the end of January. And then he goes on to say, the question is, from Burton, he says, is there any particular reason why out of the many, many cases that come into and across your desk about child abuse, okay, earlier in the deposition, Austin testifies that he gets about 5 to 6 calls, I want to say a day, about child abuse in the church, okay? I might have to go back and look at that. But he's getting a lot of calls, and the lawyer's saying, well, why in this case did you let Michelle come in and talk to you? He says, well, both the nature of her, one, I think I have a pretty good memory, but two, her story was unique. And how was it unique? It was unique in that it could lead to an extremely large claim against the church. Okay. He says, I had enough, not my normal practice when I would meet with somebody. If they wanted to sit down and give their story, I would usually meet with them. If I did meet with them, it's a little unusual that somebody would insist I meet with them in person. And it's a little unusual that I would ask somebody to be with me in the meeting, but I did in this instance. And let's stop there and talk about what's happening there, because what Randy Austin is doing is he's going through his lawyer's checklist, and he's not going to sit and meet with Michelle Austin, an adversarial individual, and just have it be a he said, she said. He's going to bring in backup. Okay. And he doesn't tell Michelle, hey, you should bring in some people. They should take some notes. I'll bring in some people. They should take some notes. No, he brings the sheep in all by herself. And then he brings in backup on his side from the law firm to create a separate set of notes, okay, that we're going to see here in just a second. But here's the reasoning he gives. He says, I was just a little bit uncomfortable with my conversation with Michelle that he had on the phone, and I wanted somebody else to be there as a witness. Does that sound like somebody who's trying to meet the needs of an abuse victim, or somebody who's trying to start laying a case against an adversary and utilizing a second witness to make sure that his testimony outnumbers the testimony of the abuse victim? Okay. And so he invites this woman by the name of Erin in to be part of this. And Erin is an interesting individual. Her last name is Carlisle, and Erin shows up in multiple depositions related to Curtin McConkie. She's been there for a very long time, and she has a very small footprint online. And so a very interesting individual who knows where a lot of the bodies are buried is Erin Carlisle. So you can see here that he's having Erin create a set of independent notes. He says, the question is, then when she came in, did you make notes of this meeting at all? And Randy Austin answers, I did. And he says, and I asked Erin to make notes as well, independent. And again, you can see in the language that he's using that he knows exactly what he's doing. He's creating 2 sets of independent notes so that if they ever have to go to court, they can submit those notes as evidence into the record. And it won't just be Randy Austin versus Michelle Nielsen. It'll now be Randy Austin and Erin Carlisle versus abuse victim Michelle Nielsen. Okay. And so I just want to keep pointing out, I want people to understand this pattern that Randy Austin knows exactly what he's doing. And he's working through the checklists that he's been trained to work through to make sure that he's putting his client, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in the best position possible to dispose of this adversary who came to them looking for help from people she believed represented Jesus Christ. Okay. Here's trick number 3 that lawyers use. He says, so I was careful to ask her, do you have any objection to my contacting these leaders who you've had problems with? Do you have any objection to the names that she had provided me of the persons who could corroborate her story? So there's 2 pieces to this, okay? First of all, he is being careful. He's being very careful to back her into a corner and make sure that her case is as weak as possible and that his client's case is as strong as possible. And one of the ways he's doing that is he's getting her consent. Okay. He's getting her consent to contact people that he's telling her about. But if you look in the deposition, what you'll see is that he only contacts the leaders that she had problems with. Michelle had leaders that she had good relationships with as well that may have corroborated her story more than the leaders that she had problems with. But Randy Austin and Curtin McConkie only contact the leaders that she's having problems with. Because what they're trying to determine is, did these leaders do something that we have liability for? Not, is this abuse victim telling us the truth? Okay. So Michelle does provide that consent, but I would not consider that informed consent. Okay. In my personal opinion, I would not consider that informed consent. And you can even see that Michelle, her spidey senses are going off because she starts asking things like, why do you need to talk to those people? Okay. And what Randy tells her is really dissembling, because what Randy tells her is, well, we want to corroborate your story, because if we can corroborate your story, when I take your story to the leaders of the church, well, that will sway whether or not they decide to give you this money that you're asking for, or it'll sway the decision that they make about how they want to help you. Okay. But that's not why he's doing it at all. Okay. The reason he needs to talk to those people is to identify for his client whether a leader of the church ever did anything that could be considered like slander or defamation or anything along those lines where Michelle's claim actually has legs. He's not seeking to corroborate her story. He's seeking to identify whether his client has liability, and he's going to take that to the leaders of this committee, who aren't even the leaders of the church. Okay. He's going to take that and say, yeah, guys, we got a problem because Bishop so-and-so did such and such, and we have liability there. And so we do need to settle with Michelle. Okay. But Michelle thinks she's going down one path, and Randy Austin is taking her down a completely different path than where she thinks she's going. She really is like a lamb going to the slaughter. Okay. Did Randy Austin tell Michelle Nielsen that the church wanted to help? The question is, did you ever tell her, meaning Michelle, that the church likes to help in cases like this? And he says, I may have told her that, but then he corrects himself and he says, yes, that would be a true statement. So again, this is like the wolf in sheep's clothing, right? He's showing up with this sheep's mask saying, oh, the church likes to help in cases like this, Michelle. And that makes her feel comfortable, and it opens her up, and it makes her willing to say, yes, you can contact the people to corroborate my story. When really inwardly, what Randy Austin is doing is nothing but taking information from her to make her position less strong and his client's position more strong. Okay. But he did tell her that the church wanted to help. Then there's a dispute about something else that Michelle claims that he said, but that Randy Austin says he didn't. Okay. And the question is, did you ever tell her that as a priesthood bearer, you had an obligation to help her? And Randy Austin answers, no, I have never, ever in all of my life mixed my role as a lawyer and priesthood holder. No. Now, this is interesting in for a couple of different reasons. Again, I have experience working with the hotline. And when we called into the hotline, there were discussions about how, as priesthood holders, we needed to protect abuse victims. So I tend to lean towards believing Michelle here. I can't prove that Michelle is telling the truth, but I tend to lean towards believing that Randy Austin did do this. But it's really fascinating what Randy Austin's response is here, because you can see very clearly in Randy Austin's mind, he has very clearly separated his life as a lawyer and his life as a priesthood holder. And that's kind of troubling to somebody who used to be a member of the church, because you don't get to just take off your priesthood when you're being a lawyer and behave in a different way than a priesthood holder should act in just because you're acting as a lawyer. But Randy Austin seems to have segmented this in his mind and decided, when I'm a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, and when I'm a priesthood holder, I'm a priesthood holder, and never thus shall I let those two things mix. Okay? And so as we're going through this, I hope you can see clearly that Randy's very sincere about this. I think he honestly believes that he has never, ever in all of his life mixed his role as a lawyer and a priesthood holder. The question is, can you really separate the two? And I would say that you can't, and you shouldn't. Okay, when you take upon yourselves the priesthood, that's operative even in your occupation. Okay. So Randy's got Michelle pretty well buttered up at this point. He's told her that the church wants to help her. He's potentially told her that as a priesthood holder, he has a duty to help her. He's told her that he represents the church in a way that she doesn't understand. And now he starts going sort of for the jugular here a little bit. And what he's going to do is he's going to start trying to create a physical record, okay, for potential litigation. And he's also going to try to extract the demand from the potential adversary. Because if you can do that, if she then goes to a lawyer and the lawyer says, oh no, 5 million is not nearly enough, you can go to court and say, yeah, but when I asked her, she just wanted 5 million, Your Honor. Why all of a sudden did she get so greedy? Okay, so here's this part of the deposition. It says, at some point in time, did you ask Michelle how much she wanted? I'm going to skip down. It says, I asked her, I said, Michelle, would you be willing to type out or write down your account? Okay, now in a non-traumatized, like clearly thinking, rational individual, that request would set off all kinds of red flags. But in a deeply traumatized abuse victim who thinks that she's in a safe place, you believe that what you're doing is giving them something that will help you get the settlement that you need. What Randy Austin is doing here is locking her into a story. Because the minute she writes it down, and what we're going to see is that he ends up having her notarize this. Once you have her locked into the story, it's now, again, evidence that can be entered into the record if she decides to sue you. And if she deviates by 1 iota from what she told you during this time, then you get to use that and say, oh, well, in January of 2002, Michelle told us this, and now she's saying that. Why is Michelle not telling the same story twice? And so you can see that Michelle is getting, like, they're starting to put on the shackles at this point, okay? They're getting her to write down her account, but she can't write it down. So he says, well, what if I made a tape recorder available to you? Even better, because now it's in her own voice. He says, could you record your account? And eventually she agrees to do these things, okay? And then he finally asks her, Michelle, what is it you would like? Okay. And I guarantee that when Randy Austin said this, I guess I can't guarantee it, but just having worked with some lawyers a little bit, it wasn't like, all right, Michelle, tell me what you want. It was like, okay, Michelle, I'm listening. I care. What is it that you want here? Right. But all he's trying to do is get a number from her. He's just trying to get a number, because if she gives him a number and she gives him the account, he's already in a 100-yard dash. He's already 90 yards ahead of her, just by getting her to record her experience and give him a number. So again, not acting in the interests of the abuse victim, but very clearly acting in the interests of his client. Okay. Here's this part that I talked about where Randy Austin says that Michelle's making demands. He says, and that's when she told me the figure. What was her demand? And then her lawyer says, well, did she say it was a demand? Or did she say, and Austin interrupts and says, I think I characterized that, because that's the words I would have used. And I think you need to understand how deep Randy Austin is into his lawyer lifestyle, because he truly sees himself as a lawyer for the Lord Jesus Christ. As a lawyer representing the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he's not just representing, in his mind, the church's interests, he's representing the Lord's interests. And so this woman who came into him is making demands against the Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, and so he slips and he uses this language of demand. And the other lawyer rightfully points out that Michelle never made a demand. She didn't want to sue the church. She was there to talk to somebody who would be reasonable with her and help offer and make a settlement that would help her maintain like life, like the bare necessities of life. Okay. As we go on, you can sort of see Randy Austin in his position as a lawyer. And it says here, she didn't want to have to sue the church, but if she had to, she would, if the church wouldn't be fair with her. And she wanted to know what the church was willing to do. And if they weren't willing to do enough, she'd go hire a lawyer. And then the question is, and so you agreed to help her? And Randy Austin says, I didn't agree to help her. I agreed to take her claim to the church. And this is about as lawyerese as it gets. Okay, because if offering to take the abuse victim story to the leaders of this committee, who Michelle probably thought were leaders of the church, isn't help, well, what is it? What is he doing? But he won't let himself say in the deposition that he agreed to help her, because if he says that he agreed to help her, then that strengthens Michelle's case. So instead he says, I didn't agree to help her. I agreed to take her claim to the church. The question is, you did use the words at some point. I think you already admitted that you were going to help her. Answer, I said I didn't know whether I could have said that. I don't know that. I don't have a memory of having said that. But remember how he said he thinks he has a good memory? Well, all of a sudden his memory fails him. I don't have a memory of having said that, but is it possible that I said that? It's possible. And if it were that you said that, Yeah, I would help her in terms of communicating her claim to the church. If I would have said that, that would have been, and the lawyer says, absolutely. And Austin goes on, Michelle, I will take your story to the church and I will tell you what the church's response is. And we go on and says, down here, he says, the fact that she says that you said it, you can't deny that she's correct. And he answers, I don't know that she is correct. And then he asks again, you can't deny that she is possibly correct. And the answer is yes. Okay. So in the end, Randy Austin has to admit that it's possible that he did offer help in the way that Michelle says that he was offering help, but only after going through all kinds of dissembling language and nitpicking about what it means to offer help and so on and so forth. Okay. Another thing that there's a problem about is that Michelle testifies that Randy Austin told her that if she had fallen in a hole in a building, that she likely would have gotten a settlement from the church, but that because she was abused in the church, that she's not going to get a settlement because they couldn't corroborate her story. And so this just says here, when you brought the news that the church had denied her claim, and Austin says, yeah, the question goes on, did you say something to the effect that, Michelle, if you would have stepped in a hole in the building, and it's really interesting because Randy Austin knows exactly what the lawyer is talking about, and he interrupts him and he says, no. So without letting this other lawyer finish his question about what he said about stepping in a hole in the building, Austin kind of tips his hand and shows us that he knows exactly what it is that Michelle says that he said. And he jumps on that immediately because, again, if it turns out that Randy Austin had said something like this, it strengthens Michelle's claims against him and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. As we go on, we see Randy Austin continue to work through his lawyer's checklist, and we're up to number 7, okay, of what things that lawyers do when they're protecting the interests of their client, not the interests of an abuse victim. And here's what he does. He says, when she was eventually satisfied with the document that Randy Austin had asked her to produce, she signed it, dated it, and then that's the document that I used to present her story to the church. And down below, the question is, and you have it notarized? And Randy Austin says, correct. And so Randy Austin has now created a legal record with Michelle's story so that if she decides that she wants to sue the church, he has her completely locked in. And anything she adds to that story, anything she takes away from that story, they're now going to use, his client is now going to use as evidence that she's not telling the truth, and to protect his client, not the abuse victim. Lawyer trick number 8. Randy Austin does start, quote unquote, an investigation, which he's not qualified to do. He's not really investigating anything. What he's doing is he's going out and trying to find ways to limit the damage or limit the exposure of liability for his client. And one of the ways he does that is he calls a witness that Michelle had given him. Michelle had given a letter that I think we're going to look at here in a little bit. She had given a letter to Randy Austin in which a man had said, yes, there was some weird things that happened in the basement of this church, including a time where I went to a Lions Club meeting and they were dressing up in black robes and doing things that lions shouldn't, so on and so forth. And he has that document notarized. So Randy Austin calls this man and he says, to be honest with you, he didn't appear to me to have a very good memory at all. Okay. So he discounts what this man says about the abuse. But then when the man says that it was Michelle that told him this story, all of a sudden, Randy Austin is willing to trust that memory. And we're going to see that here in the next 2 things. Here's the letter. On the 3rd of January, 2002, this man, Edward Lyle, writes a letter on behalf of Michelle Nielsen. It says, the situation in Bluffdale Ward, approximately 1959 and 1960s, in the Bluffdale LDS basement, meeting was intended for the Bluffdale Lions under leadership of Lion Ron Jones. Okay, so I want you to remember Bluffdale Lions and Ron Jones because that's important later on. The meeting intention was, as I recall, interrupted with a lighting of candles, and some of the group turned to the manner of dress that supposedly fit the candle serenade, not in accordance with the Lions meeting purpose. I was there representing the Lions district, but chose to leave as I was not in accord with the, I can't make out that word, That was wrong. To this day, I remember that we were not totally in keeping with our ideals in Lionism. This was more of a satanic stigma, or perhaps a wrong manner of worship. As I recall, Ron Jones was present, and then he signs it. Okay. And so Randy Austin questions him about this, and he says, oh, but Mr. Lyle's memory wasn't very good. Okay. And so I discounted that. But all of a sudden, when he asks who it was that told him that story, Lyle tells him, eventually what Lyle told me was that Michelle had told him about it. That was the source of his knowledge. And all of a sudden, Randy Austin trusts Mr. Lyle's memory, that it was Michelle that told him the story. And so he's selectively choosing what evidence in his quote unquote investigation, he's selectively choosing what evidence to give weight to and what evidence to not give weight to. But everything tilts in the way of protecting his client's interests, not the abuse victim's interests. There's a really important part of this deposition that if you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you must understand, okay? And that is that when you go to a bishop or a stake president in the church and you tell them about your abuse story, that personal information is not personal. And we see this in the deposition because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints claims that the lawyer-client privilege outweighs the priest-penitent privilege, which in lay terms means that anything you tell a bishop about your abuse can be told to the lawyer for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So there is no privilege between you and the bishop according to the church's lawyers. Okay? So let's read this. It says, can you dial up any member of the church on your computer? No, I don't have access to it. I can ask the church to provide me with numbers. Of telephone numbers? Yes. Is that the general counsel's office? No. I have permission to go through the general counsel's office to call membership directly. Okay. They know who you are. I don't know if they know who I am, but whether my staff calls over there, we get the numbers. So they have access to these people. Okay. And then eventually what I'm going to show you here is that they're going to claim that their privilege, their attorney-client privilege, trumps your priest-penitent privilege. Okay, and that's coming up here in just a little bit. You also need to understand that despite the church's claims that they don't work with law enforcement, when they're forced to give depositions, it turns out that they are working with law enforcement. Because Randy Austin said, or the question comes to Randy Austin, you wrote a letter to a Detective Lopez somewhere. Do you remember that? And Austin answers, I did. August of 2002, I believe. Is that someone you knew? And he says, nope, he had contacted me. The sheriff's office called me, wanted to know if I'd spoken to Michelle Nielsen. I indicated that I had. They wanted to know if we had looked into it. I told them that we had. And the sheriff's office was calling you on behalf of Michelle or just out of the blue? And he says they were investigating. So now Michelle is working with police and she's working with lawyers, and those police and those lawyers are going behind her back and working with each other. So just know that if you go to the authorities and you go to the church's law firm, that they're working behind your back, not in your interest, okay, but in the interest of their respective employers. You have to understand, okay, if you get two things out of this presentation today, what I hope you get is that nothing you tell your ecclesiastical leaders is private, and that if you go to the church for help, they are not there to help you. No matter what they say in newspaper articles, no matter what Tad Walsh writes, no matter what Randy Austin says out there in public, the church is not there to help the victims. Okay, Curtin McClonky is there to represent the interests of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and limit their exposure to the liability in situations in which they're liable. That is their purpose. The purpose of a system is what it does. And what I'm showing you today is that the system protects the interests of the church, not of the victim. So please don't go to your bishops anymore with your abuse claims, because if you give those abuse claims to your bishop, they're just going to hand them right off to the adversary. Okay? The people who are liable for the damage that's been done to you. And if you do tell your bishop, please never go to Curtin McConkie for help, because they are not there to help you. No matter what they tell you, they are not there to help you. Okay? And here's where we can see that in Randy Austin's answers. The question, from that time forward, everything that you did was in anticipation of litigation. So from the minute that Michelle Nielsen comes in and tells him she may file a claim, everything he does is in anticipation of litigation. And Randy Austin says, potentially. Okay. And then it says, and for that reason, I take it you never reported back to Michelle on any of the details of your investigation. And Randy says, I don't remember whether we had any conversations about the conversations I had with different people. And this is another thing that you have to recognize. When you go to Curtin McConkie as an abuse victim, everything that they do from the moment they start talking to you is what's called work product. Okay. And that work product is protected by attorney-client privilege. And later in this deposition, you start to see Randy Austin exercise the attorney-client privilege over and over and over again. So everything you tell them, they can take and they can use it however they want to, wherever they want to. But anything that they investigate, they will never share with you ever, because it's work product. And they're going to exercise attorney-client privilege and make sure that you don't know what they know. And that becomes a huge part of this story coming up here in not too long. One of the things that's really interesting is that Curtin McConkie seems to think that bishops and stake presidents are employees of the corporation known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which they're not. Okay, the leaders in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are what they call lay leaders. They don't get paid. They don't have any formal training in theology or anything like that. They're just normal people who take these callings. But in a case of abuse, Curtin McConkie is going to claim that that local leader is an employee of the church and therefore is covered under attorney-client privilege. And I don't know why nobody's ever challenged this, because I think that that's very tenuous at best. That claim is very tenuous at best. But what you're going to see here is that they start talking about, it says, you were investigating a claim that Michelle was making against the church. He says, yes, I wanted them to be aware, them being local leaders. I wanted the local leaders to be aware that a member of their congregation was threatening to sue the church and that they may need to exercise some caution as they talk to her. So Randy Austin is talking to the local leaders and poisoning the well. He's saying, okay, we've had somebody come and she wants $5 million from us, and you need to be careful about what you say and don't say. And automatically in that local leader's mind, there's sort of that third layer of the pyramid. You have your occult leaders, you have your bureaucracy, and then you have your lay members. And these lay members worship the ground that these occultists, okay, walk on. And they love these bureaucrats because they protect the prophet. And so you go to a local leader and you start talking about a local member who's causing problems for the church, and you're poisoning the well in the mind of that local leader. And that's what Randy Austin is doing. He's saying, there's somebody threatening to sue the church, and you might need to exercise some caution as you talk to her. Okay, so it goes on. It says, did you describe the parameters of that caution? And he says, I may have. I probably did. And what would those parameters be? Here's what Randy Austin says. I don't think I'd get into the substance of what my conversations was with those bishops and stake presidents. That's privileged. And the lawyer says, that's privileged too? And he says, I believe so. They're my client. So now Randy Austin is not only representing the corporation known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he's now representing just random Billy Bob Joe in Bluffdale, Utah, who happens to be a bishop in the spiritual body known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, not tied to the corporation in any way, shape, or form from an employment standpoint. But the church is going to expand that privilege and say that anything that the local leaders say is privileged communication between an attorney and their client. Okay? And so the lawyer says, are you taking the position her present bishop and the stake president are clients of the firm? And what Randy Austin's lawyer, who's there, ends up saying is, I think that's something that a judge should determine. But that's the position that they're taking. Okay? So Randy Austin does his investigation and he takes it to this committee, okay? And he says, I took the information and provided it to those at the church, okay? Now he's conflating the church and the corporation again. And they do this all the time. They do not want you to know the difference between the spiritual body that was named the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the corporation that goes by the same name. And so they'll conflate the church and they'll never talk about it as a corporation. But what he did is he took the information and provided it to those at the corporation who make decisions on these kinds of issues. Okay, in this case in particular, no church leader was ever involved in this decision as far as I can discern. Who's on that committee? Well, here's the attendees. A man by the name of Vaughn Keach, who's no longer with us. Randy Austin, a Curtin McConkie legal assistant. A man from the Office of General Counsel by the name of Boyd Black. A man by the name of Paul Ridding, okay, who, if you followed me, you'll understand that Paul Ridding is, his relatives are in the Hamblin case documents as the harp teacher of the Hamblin girls. You also have Fred Riley, who happened to be a local leader in one of the congregations that I grew up in Arvada, Colorado. Then you have Lance Wickman, who's also general counsel for the church and Wickman's assistant. What you don't have in this is any member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, any member of the First Presidency, any ecclesiastical leader. These are corporate entities representing a corporation, making decisions about whether the church has liability, not whether what they're doing is right or wrong, not whether the abuse happened or not, but it's a very cut and dry question. Does this person have enough evidence to require us to offer a settlement due to the liability that we have? And I promise you, even if they're going to do a settlement, they're going to give you the least amount they possibly can, because that's their job as lawyers, is to minimize risk and minimize the damage to the image and assets of the church. Okay. So here's the process according to Austin in the deposition. Austin presents the findings of fact. A written report can be requested. A proposed resolution may be proposed. If there's disagreement, it can be escalated to the general authorities, but these men are authorized to state the position of the church, even if no church authority is involved, because according to Austin, he says, more often than not, the decision would be made in that setting as to how to respond to the claim. I'd be given direction then to, would you please get back to the individual and tell them A, B, C, this is the position of the church again, not the corporation. It's really the position of the corporation. But these men inside this corporation have been authorized to speak in the name of the church. In this case, they decided that they were not going to settle. They felt like they couldn't corroborate Michelle's story. And just hang on for like about 5 more minutes, because I'm going to show you that Michelle's story was definitely corroborated. Okay. And then I'm going to show you that they hid that from Michelle. But for right now, I just want you to understand that they decided that the story was not corroborated. And so instead of giving her settlement, they say that they're going to give her therapy. It says, the decision was that I should get back to Michelle, indicate to her that the church wasn't willing to provide any monetary settlement relative to her claim, but that they were sympathetic to her need for counseling. So this is just another version of David Levitt's tragically mentally ill woman story. Because what they're saying is, yeah, we don't believe what you told us, okay? But we're sympathetic to the fact that you're tragically mentally ill. And so we will, because we love you, Michelle, and because we want to give pastoral care, we're willing to pay for a little bit of counseling. And when I say a little bit, I mean a little bit. And I'll show you that in just a while. So, but he says she needs to coordinate that counseling on an ongoing basis with her local leaders. I don't know whether those are the exact words I used, but that's the gist of what I communicated to Michelle. And did you communicate that to Michelle? Yes, I did. So they turned Michelle away. Okay. And on September 24th, 2002, Lance Wickman, who is the highest up in the church you can go inside the legal department, he's literally the prophet. He's literally the lawyer to the prophets, the First Presidency. He writes her a letter and he says this: Dear Sister Nielsen, the First Presidency has asked that I respond on their behalf to your letter dated September 6th, 2002. We are very sorry to learn of the difficult problems you've been experiencing. We understand that your bishop and stake president have both met with you to offer counseling and other assistance. We know that you have met with Randy Austin of Curtin and McConkie, who has thoroughly investigated. He did not thoroughly investigate, okay? But that's what Lance Wickman says. He's thoroughly investigated your claims and discussed them with you. We understand that his office has been unable to substantiate the claims you have made, because he didn't want to substantiate the claims he made, the claims that were made, because he was representing the church, not the abuse victim. The conduct you have described is most serious. I understand that you have already reported it to the police. If you have not, you might consider doing so. Perhaps their investigation can put your mind at rest. Meanwhile, please know that we are praying for your physical and emotional healing. We earnestly believe that the best course open to you is to work with your local leaders to receive the help you need. So Lance Wickman punts the problem back down to local leaders on behalf of the prophets, who are supposed to be the judges in Israel. Okay. Now, I want to jump back here because remember this date, September 24th, 2002. Okay. 1 week later, okay, so we're caught up. This is Lance Wickman. That's the man who wrote the letter that we just wrote. Here's that letter again. I'm not going to point it out, except to point out that his office has been unable to substantiate the claims you have made. As of September 24th, 2002, that's true. But then on October 1st, 1 week later, another Bluffdale resident by the name of Gina Pemberton Johnson, now Gina Pemberton, contacts the LDS Abuse hotline and tells a story that is strikingly similar to the one that Michelle Nielsen had just told the hotline.
The message, this was Kern and McConkie doing this, because I'll tell you what, I don't know how many people know this. They have a helpline. LDS Social Services has a helpline. So the bishops are told to call if there's somebody that comes in and says something, really drastic or something, so they need help. But guess who's on the other line? Found out Kern and McConkie. One of the attorneys are on the other line listening in. So they're, of course, going to do anything they can to protect the church, which that's fine. But if a victim's telling something that happened and they need help,
it's not fine.
They should be helped.
We
right?
support individuals and victims, not institutions over the victims.
Right.
That is immoral, it is wrong, it is evil.
Right.
It is better
exactly.
than millstone hung around their neck and drown in the depths of the sea than offend one of these little ones, let alone rape, sodomize, abuse, and torture.
Yes, I agree. And so it's, again, they want to protect the reputation, which I told them, I've been very bold with all of them, and I told them, you are making yourself look worse by not helping the victims.
Yeah, not if no one knows, though.
Huh?
Not if they can silence you.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the goal.
Well, that was the goal. So later on, I met with another stake president who had talked to Kern and McConkie, and I asked him if he had talked to him, and he was upset. He said, how did you know? And I said, because I know how it works. And he started to tell me that I couldn't, talk about this stuff. So I told him, I said, I'm going to tell you something. He said, you try to silence me. I said, that's witness tampering and obstruction of justice.
Ooh.
And you could be called into court at some point, and you could be in trouble for silencing me. I will never stop talking about this.
Wow.
I will always try to protect children and educate people on what's going on. And it doesn't matter who did it. If whoever has done this, it needs to be brought to justice and the truth come out. So I said, I'm never going to do that.
Wow.
So then they had me talk to another stake president, and they were going to hold a court on me. And he brought up all these scriptures, and I said, you've been talking to Kern McConkie too? And he said, yes. And I said, okay.
That's sick. That is sick that they brought up scriptures.
Well, I know, but guess what?
You.
I don't know why, but I was helped divinely again, and I just quoted back scripture, back to him. And I said, I am doing what the prophet Joseph Smith told me to do. I am reporting injustices and things in dark places, and that read him to Doctrine and Covenants. And the Book of Mormon, I said, this is secret combinations, and if we don't, any of the people that uphold them, it's going to be the destruction of our nation, of people. And I said, so I am doing what I'm supposed to do. Well, anyway, after that, he said, well, we were going to have a church court on you, but because of how you said things, we're not going to. Now, I know I was divinely helped, and then he called me after, and he said, I'm not supposed to talk to you, but I'm talking to you as a friend. And he says, maybe it would be good for you to not talk about this to the bishops and stake presidents anymore. And I said, I will never stop talking about this because it needs to be brought out.
Wow.
So like I said, there's some people just trying, like you said, they're trying to follow what's right, but they're confused, or they're not doing the right thing because they want to be in line with things, or I don't know if it's status or popularity, I don't know, but it's just wrong. Like you said, it's not. The victims are suffering, and the children are being perpetrated on because people won't wake up and look at what's going on. So that's what happened there.
Okay. Now, what people need to understand about this is that Michelle Nielsen and Gina Pemberton had never met each other. They were 10 years apart from each other. So they were just far enough that they never knew each other growing up. Okay. So they do end up meeting each other, but at this point, they've never met each other. But within a week of each other, they both report to the abuse hotline very similar stories.
Human remains were identified by cadaver dogs in Bluffdale. There are a lot of locations where we reported witnessing the burial, clandestine graves of people who had spoken up against the trafficking and the rituals. When I was a child, 10 years old, I witnessed unaliving of an entire family. This was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. My sisters and I were witnesses, and we went to the school at Riverton Elementary School where these homicides took place when we were children. My father was involved in this. He was the one that took us to the school at night for these events where they basically, over the period of several months, ended the lives of each member of the family. We have filed the reports multiple times with law enforcement. Riverton City closed the case, saying there wasn't enough evidence. Michelle Nielsen and I continue to report. I left Utah in 2021 to spend more time with my family and to protect myself from any harm that might happen to me.
And I'm going to show you how those corroborate. But first, I want to look at a couple things. Let's look at the work product of Curtin McConkie as it relates to abuse cases and how they handle this. This document was leaked by an organization called Mormon Leaks. And what it is a spreadsheet of all the cases that the church is handling and some notes about those cases. And in there, you're going to find things like, hey, we've polluted some land and people are going to sue us. So you're authorized to settle that for $900,000. And hey, this guy this guy claims he was abused by his scout leader. You're authorized to settle it for $50,000 or whatever it is. In this case, though, what they say is about this abuse case is more drama. Okay. So just know that when you go to Curtin McConkie and you talk about your abuse case, in the background, they're writing spreadsheets that are talking about the drama that you're bringing to their life. Okay. Not concerned about the abuse victim themselves. Okay. This is somebody, let's look at this again. This is somebody that was, when she was age 7, began suffering abuse by somebody whose abusive tendencies were known to local leaders as early as 1994. She now demands compensation. And there's that word again, demands. She now demands compensation from the church. Local leaders had acknowledged that this young lady had been abused, and additional abuse occurred thereafter. But how do they view this? More drama. Okay, please don't take your cases to Curtin McConkie. Please. Okay, they're not sympathetic. They're not empathetic. They don't care about you as a victim. They care about minimizing the damage to their client. Okay, let's establish that on October 1st, Gina reached out. This is an email from Gina to a man by the name of Langford Lloyd on Tuesday, October 1st, 2002. She says, Scott and I decided to rewrite the letter. He was up all night rewriting it and then got called to work after getting only 1 hour of sleep. Anyway, this morning, I just felt like the fog was lifting and I realized the church has an 800 number to report child abuse. In fact, an entire floor of the church office building is dedicated to the hotlines. So instead of typing the letter, I made a phone call. Long story short, I got through to the Ritual Abuse Investigation Department, and Ken Thevenin talked with me and took down all the info. He said that there was no tolerance for pedophiles, ritual abusers, murderers in the church, and that even if no evidence could be produced other than the testimonies of 1 or 2 witnesses, parentheses, we have 3 testimonies, the person in question would be removed from their position as quickly as possible. He asked me to fax the letter where my mother sent me in 1994, wherein she states that the sheriff contacted us when the girls were up there reporting the murder and the abuse and have been very supportive of our position. Ken told me that the church realizes that ritual abuse is hard to prove, but is considered to be a growing threat to the church, and that many cases once investigated, parentheses, some have taken more than 10 years, close parenth, have proved to be true. The church's official position on ritual abuse now is that the victims must be believed, and even if they cannot prove it in a church court or court of law, the church will not allow that person to ever have a calling where they have access to children. Okay, so on October 1st, Gina gives us an extensive narrative of what it was she did and what it was that was discussed with this man by the name of Ken Thevenin, who was a director for LDS Social Services and took calls related to abuse. Now remember, September 24th, they closed the Michelle Nielsen case. October 1st, Gina calls, and this is the story that she tells. She starts talking about a man by the name of John Turner, who was a bishop in the church. On the left, you have Gina's story. She's talking about the wife of Bishop John Turner, who was a warden at Utah State Prison in Bluffdale. On the right, you have Michelle's notes. And in Michelle's notes that she provided Curtin McConkie, she names John Turner. On the left, you have Gina's story that she tells them on October 1st about the adult members of these rituals would meet as a group when they were in the Lions Club. On the right, you have the deposition of Randy Austin, who acknowledges right here, he had some memories of candles and robes and some unusual things that have been connected to the Lions Club that happened in the church. And then you see over here, it's all about lions and all about rituals. So now you have Gina 1 week after Michelle was telling these stories, telling the exact same stories. They also corroborate on things like candles, specific details like candles and animals' blood being used. Okay, over here, it talks about the men went down the stairs first with black candles, waiting in the girls' bathroom with our candles. Okay, the tile was yellow-pink by candlelight. We each had a white candle. Okay, and then up here somewhere, doesn't mention it, goat's blood. Okay, right here, goat's blood. On this other side, Gina, so this is Gina, on this side is Michelle. And when she told her story, she talked about candles too. Bizarre ceremonies, people in robes, candles lit, animal or others' blood poured over her and others. Okay, and I'm going to pause again because I'm worried that I'm moving too quickly. You have to understand that these women did not know each other at this point. They grew up in the same city, but they were 10 years apart from each other. They then went to the Curtin McConkie law firm 1 week from each other, and Curtin McConkie segregated them from each other. And despite the fact that they were telling the same story about John Turner and Ron Jones and the Lions Club and candles and animals' blood, they kept these women apart from each other so that they wouldn't know that they were corroborating each other's story and wouldn't know that they had a case against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, the question becomes, is what they did illegal? And I think the answer to that is no. Okay? But this is like the most stark case that I can give you to help you understand that these people do not care about you as an abuse victim. Because any decent human being, any moral human being, any ethical human being who had just turned away a single mother of 4 and told her that she was tragically mentally ill and needed therapy, but that we weren't going to give her a settlement because we couldn't corroborate her story, would go to her the week after when another woman came and told the exact same story that you had just heard. And they would say, oh my gosh, Michelle, we messed up. We now have another witness. We're going to really look at this. We're going to contact the police. We're going to get everybody involved. We're going to find out the truth, and we're going to help you. But they didn't do that. They did the legal thing, which is to keep these potential adversaries of their clients separated from each other with no knowledge of each other. And they built an effectual wall between them so that they would never find out that there were two people telling the exact same story about the exact same church and the exact same leader and the exact same club and the exact same types of activities. Okay, so I'm going to pause here because I've been talking for a very long time, and I want to give you a chance to just, add anything you want to hear or ask any questions, and just give my voice a little bit of a rest here as well. But this is where I want to stop and let you ask any questions.
Gosh, I want to thank you for how you present this information. First of all, these court cases come up a lot in survivor testimonies, and so much so that so many survivors won't even go seek help because the outcome is so similar. I think the outward perception seems like the survivor does not go because they're afraid of being outed for wanting attention or for lying, when in fact it's these exact reasons that make survivors so terrified. How you said they're coming out of these extremely traumatizing situations. They're so vulnerable. Some of them haven't even ever told somebody their story before. They're just remembering memories. It's a horrific time in their life. Some of them are losing everything. They've lost family members. And so they're finally going and taking that first step, and they're met with this type of opposition that is covered in a way, it masks in a way that looks like help. It sounds like help. Some of the things that they're asking can seem helpful. Oh, you want evidence? You want my testimony on film? You want me to record it? You want me to sign this? Like, whatever I got to do. These people they're not involved in law. And it's really incredible, just like how we were talking about with the quasi-religious secret society aspect of this, how you've presented, you can't do both. Like, you can't say that you're a leader of the church while also participating in the Black Supper the night before you're worshiping at church the next day. Like, if that was sort of the standard that was presented, it would be very clear, but you can see how it intermingles to really gaslight the victim and to permit and to put walls up from them ever making progress. And you see that same conflict with the secret societies and being a leader of the church, and then these lawyers trying to put on a mask and say that they're going to, quote unquote, help victims, while simultaneously using that information, telling it all to the church, and then not helping the victim, helping the church instead.
Yeah. So I do want to address something you said because it's very important, but I think it actually shows just how insidious this really is. I want to point out that in the deposition, Randy Austin repeatedly and emphatically points out the fact that he did tell Michelle Nielsen that he represented the church and that she had the right to go get a lawyer if she wanted to. So I am not in any way, shape, or form accusing Randy Austin or Kurt McConkie of doing anything illegal. But what's so insidious about this is that when you're growing up in the church, you're taught that this abuse hotline is there to protect victims. Then you go and you get abused and you get traumatized. And so the first place you think of to get help is your ecclesiastical leaders and the church's law firm. Okay? But you're traumatized. Your brain's not working correctly anymore. Your body's not working. Your nervous system is fried. You're looking, like you said, you're losing everything. Most people are losing their marriages. They're losing their children. They're losing their jobs. They're on the edge of homelessness. You're desperate. Okay? You need help. And you go to these people who've presented to you your whole life that, hey, we're here to help you. We love you. You're a child of God. If anything happens, we're your family. Okay? But what I think I've shown really clearly here today already, and I'm going to show even more in just a little bit, is that in the background, they know that that's not what they're doing. And that's what's so insidious about it, because they open the gate and they wave you in kindly, but in their heart and in their mind, they know exactly what they're doing. And they know that they're not there to protect your interests. And they may say the words, I represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but to a traumatized victim, that doesn't mean anything. They think that you're a bishop still. And they may say, and you can go get a lawyer, but depending on how you say that, right? Depending on how your tone of voice when you say that really affects how somebody's going to take that. If you say, you can get a lawyer if you need to, but the church really wants to help, which we know that Randy Austin said, and you're a traumatized abuse victim, you're so tired, the last thing you want to do is get another lawyer involved who you don't trust to begin with, because the church has taught you not to trust lawyers. So the last thing you want to do is that you just want to fall into the arms of this man who opened the gate for you and told you that the church wants to help you. And I think that's what's so gross and so insidious about this story, is that they have the facade of a church, but when they open the gate and you're an abuse victim and you walk through that, you are literally walking into the slaughterhouse. And the entire purpose of that lawyer is to make sure that your claim never causes any harm to their client, which is the church that you thought that you were visiting. So it's kind of hard to even wrap your mind around it. And I would encourage people to take time after the show and just think through what it would be like to be an abuse victim, so deeply traumatized, who grew up in a church that told you that you're a child of God and that you're a family and that they'll help you. And then to find out that this is how they actually treat abuse victims, and to be going through this being like banged around all over the place. And it's a game of attrition, right? They make it last forever. And they're constantly asking you for things, and they're lengthening their investigations out. In this case in particular, they did a document dump on Michelle's lawyer, and he didn't respond timely, so they got the case thrown out. They don't fight fair. Okay, they don't fight like they don't approach this in a scriptural manner. They're using lawfare to slaughter you. And that's how it works. And I think that's what's so bad and so insidious about what's going on here in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and particularly this law firm, Curtin McConkie.
I completely agree.
All right, let's keep going. So again, let's just back up 1 second. September 24th, Michelle Nielsen's case gets tossed basically by Curtin McConkie. They say they're not going to help her except for a little bit of money for therapy. 1 week later, Gina comes in. She's telling the exact same story that Michelle told. They segregate the two, okay? But you know that they know it seriously because they immediately escalate Gina's case to that top lawyer, Lance Wickman. And we can see that in the emails that Gina's sending. It says, the case with the church has been handed up a level again from the supervisor, Ken Thevenin, to the presidency of the 70 and the staff of 4 attorneys. This means that Elder Wickman will handle the case. He used to be the stake president of Poway Stake, is currently employed as an attorney for the church along with Michael Jensen. The two of them were always close friends. This in itself is a miracle. And I just want to point out, this is how the traumatized abuse victim sees this. Okay? They see it getting escalated and they're like, oh my gosh, it's a miracle. They're listening to me. They're taking it. It's going up to the highest levels. It's gonna happen. Okay? But what's really happening is this very small group of corporate employees know that they just had a case come in a week ago, so they immediately escalate it because it's a severe risk to the image and assets of the church. And so they give it to the top person so that they can then handle it internally without telling Gina, wow, Gina, this is so crazy that you came in on October 1st, because just a week ago, we just closed a case of a woman who was telling us exactly the same thing. They don't tell her that part. They just say, oh, we're escalating it, Gina, and giving her hope and making her think that miracles are happening. Okay? This is very, very dangerous, okay? And I'm going to show you how it's very, very dangerous coming up here right now. Before I do that, I want to show that Lance Wickman is failing to disclose corroborative testimony to victims. On the left, you have Gina Johnson. It says, just a quick question. Will you send docs directly to Rick Cantrell? I'm so worried about them getting lost, just a little paranoid. Can you send photocopies to me? I'd like to see them. Thanks so much for all your efforts. My father's case has been handed up a level to Elder Wickman's committee of attorneys and the presidency of the 70. I'm sure you can touch base with them. They may want or need more information and plan to investigate what they can before interviewing my father. So that puts Ken Thevenin out of the loop. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we know that Elder Wickman is involved. On the right-hand side is that September 24th, 2002 letter. Okay, these two things are less than a month apart. And Lance Wickman is writing to Michelle Nielsen, and Gina is writing to a man by the name of Chris Nelson, who was helping her, telling him that Wickman's involved. And yet no information is getting back and forth between Michelle and Gina. Okay, they've built a firewall in between there to protect their clients. As Gina thinks that these miracles are occurring and so on and so forth, she writes another letter on November 6th, talking about another meeting that was supposed to be set up. It says, yesterday afternoon, I talked to Ken Thevenin, the church headquarters therapist, and Randy Austin. Okay, so Randy Austin is involved. Neither one of them are allowed to tell me specifically what church action will be taken against my father, but that recommendations have been made and that the action will be made in the next 2 or 3 weeks. The South Salt Lake Area Authority will meet with my father. I don't know who that is. Ken Thevenin could say only that I would be pleased with the outcome. Then I started bawling because she's traumatized and she's been dealing with this for 30, 40 years at this point. He said that the church will try to coordinate a meeting between myself and my father and that Ken would mediate the meeting if I want to. I told him that I would be very grateful if he would arrange such a meeting. It will all depend on my father's willingness. So there's another meeting set up, and this is supposed to be Ken Thevenin, Gina, Lance Wickman, and Gina's father and family. This meeting gets scheduled for right after Thanksgiving. And so as the meeting is approaching, according to the story that I've been told, Gina and her family have Thanksgiving in California where they live. They have Thanksgiving, they wake up early the next morning, and nobody's really told her if this meeting is going to happen or not. But so she calls to Ken Thevenin, and Ken Thevenin says, just show up. The meeting's going to happen. So they get in their car in California, they drive to Salt Lake City. On December 2nd, 2002, Gina goes into the church office building, has the secretary at the front desk call up to Lance Wickman's office. And Lance Wickman says, I've never heard that name of Gina Johnson before. There will be no meeting and you need to send her away. Okay. Gina thought that miracles were happening. She thought she was going to have a meeting with Lance Wickman, and he pretends like he doesn't know her, nor does he disclose to her that he knows about Michelle Nielsen. And this sends Gina off the edge. Okay. They get in the car, they go from Salt Lake City back to California where she lives. She walks into the bathroom of her home. She opens the medicine cabinet. She finds some old pills from her husband's surgery, Vicodin, if I remember right. And she takes 17 Vicodin in an attempt to kill herself. And she kind of explains here a little bit later on in 2004 when she writes a letter to Thevenin, to Kevin Thevenin, Randy Austin, and Lance Wickman. And she says, all three of you spoke with me nearly 2 years ago, just prior to my visit to see my estranged brothers as they attended my father's ward. Elder Wickman, although I am still hurt by your remarks the day I contacted you on Temple Square, I am certain your intentions were innocent. And I just have to stop here and I just have to point out to people, you cannot understand the regard that people of the church hold authority figures in. So even after all this has happened, you see that these aren't angry women trying to sue the church and extract money. Gina is still giving Lance Wickman the benefit of the doubt, not knowing that Lance Wickman withheld testimony from another witness that corroborated Gina's story. Okay. But she says, I'm certain your intentions were innocent. All my life, I hoped for some kind of help from the church. Temple Square was always a place I felt close to Heavenly Father and often prayed for relief from the abuse I suffered. After you denied ever hearing of my father or me, I felt more devastated than I have ever felt in my life. Your denial was shocking. Every step from the administration building to the church office building was agony. I felt like a door had been slammed in my face. The buildings on Temple Square that always brought a feeling of hope suddenly seemed empty, and the thought, Matthew 23:27, whited sepulchres, passed through my mind. So when we talk about the way that Curtin McConkie treats victims of abuse, I'm not talking about abstract harm. When I talk about withholding evidence from victims of abuse, can you imagine what it would have done to these two women's lives if the church had linked these two women together in 2002 when they both came to the hotline and helped them understand that there was somebody else going through what they were going through? Can you imagine the healing that could have taken place? But instead, they segregate them, they keep the evidence from them, and both of these women end up attempting to commit suicide. And we're very lucky that both of them are still with us here today. So I'm not talking about abstract harm. I'm not talking about hurt feelings. I'm talking about bodies stacking up because of the way that Curtin McConkie treats abuse victims when they come to the church for help. After this suicide attempt, the church does decide to meet with Gina's family, and they send out a man by the name of Tad Callister, who a lot of church members would know. He's a fairly prominent general authority in the church eventually, but at this time, he's just an area authority in California. And they send him out, and in the 1,200 pages of documents I have from the Utah County Sheriff's Office related to Gina's case, there's a copy of not an itinerary, but an agenda. And this was a meeting that was going to be held. This is actually dated incorrectly. It was going to be January 12th, 2003. The topic was supposed to be sexual abuse within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, policy, prevention, reporting, investigating, and helping victims and predators recover. At this meeting, you can see that Elder Tad Callister is supposed to be there, and they have a bunch of questions for him. And what happens at this meeting is basically Tad Callister shows up. Gina and her sisters are there either in person or on the phone. And Tad Callister whips out a checkbook and says, how much is it going to take to shut you guys up? He says, we're willing to pay you, but you're going to have to sign a non-disclosure agreement and agree to never talk about this, which is highly suspect, considering that the church knew about both Michelle Nielsen and Gina Johnson at this particular point, okay? But they're willing to make a settlement. The girls decide that they're not going to. In fact, they get very angry because they're not looking for money. They want the church to handle the problem, okay? They want their father to no longer have access to children. Their father was called as a bishop, okay? That's why they went to the church hotline in the first place, is that the church abuse hotline had known about Jack Pemberton since 1993, but had called him as a bishop in the 2000s, which precipitated calling the Kurt McConkie hotline. And these are not people who wanted money from the church. There was no amount of money that could heal the harm that had been done in their lives by these people. What they wanted is they wanted some church leaders with a spine and a backbone and the ability to do something to fix the abuse prevention and response mechanisms inside the church. But as frat boys do, they show up and they pull out their checkbook and they say, how much is it going to take to make this go away? And by the way, if we give you money, we're also going to shut your mouth and you have to sign an NDA. So thank heavens, Gina and her sisters refused to sign the NDA. And eventually I get my hands on 1,200 pages of documentation that tell this story. I think we've already shown that Randy Austin was aware of and working on both these Bluffdale cases, but just in case anybody missed it, over here we have Gina emailing Randy Austin on October 20th, 2004. And she's just talking about some therapy payments that had been denied because the church offered to pay therapy for these women. And then, of course, all of a sudden there was problems with the payments. And so they were having to go back to the church and find out what was going on. But on the left, we have Gina talking to Randy. And then 5 or 6 months before that, Randy Austin had written a letter to Michelle Nielsen basically saying, yes, you came to our office. Okay. You indicated you were abused. I encouraged you to report what you knew to the police, which you did. For a variety of reasons, it appears they were unable to pursue a criminal investigation. Well, it might have been partially because Kurt McConkie didn't tell the authorities that there were two women telling the same story. Randy says, you were unhappy with the response of some of your church leaders. You indicated they did not believe you. I was unable to confirm your reports in my own investigation, but know that you are sincere and believe what you report occurred. Again, no mention of the fact that a woman showed up a week after he decided that she wasn't telling the truth and was telling the same story. He doesn't mention that even in 2004, 2 years later. He says, I simply have no way of knowing what really happened at the present. I told you as we met and you agreed that you could use some professional counseling because she's a tragically mentally ill woman, right? That's the position that they're taking. I indicated that the church would be willing to pay for this counseling if your bishop agreed and approved as per church policy, punting it back down to local leadership. Okay. But basically the entire point here is simply this. In March of 2004, Randy Austin is talking to Michelle Nielsen. In October of 2004, Randy Austin is talking to Gina, and he's not letting them know that they're giving him many of the details exactly the same. Let's put it that way. They were 10 years apart from each other, so there were different people involved at different times in the abuse down there in Bluffdale. By October 14th, 2004, Michelle's local leaders have decided that they've helped enough. And so she gets a letter from her stake president, a man by the name of James C. Ovison, and her bishop, Ralph Hatton, and it says this: we want you to know that we love you as a sister in the gospel, pray for you, and want to be able to properly use the resources of the church to help you get better. We are grateful for your agreement to use Dr. Liz Hale at LDS Family Services as a liaison to monitor and advise us regarding your therapy. As you understand, the church is not to be used for an open-ended funding source for its members. Over the last 3 years, $11,137 of fast offering funds have been used in your behalf, and we hope that this final agreement of therapeutic support will also be of great benefit to you. Let me just take a deep breath before I go through this, because this makes me so angry I can hardly see straight when I read it. What you have here is a local leader who has no capacity or ability to make a determination of when a person is healed. He's forcing Michelle to see a therapist by the name of Dr. Liz Hale, who's a celebrity therapist in Salt Lake City who works for the church at LDS Family Services, instead of Michelle using the therapist that she wanted to use. I've been told by other people who use LDS Family Services that they've been told by their therapists that LDS Family Services therapists are required to record, the therapy sessions, and the church forces the people who are receiving financial help to sign waivers so that therapists can send the entire tapes of the sessions to local leaders who are like plumbers and accountants to listen to. Okay. So you're taking somebody who's had lifelong harm and you're telling them, hey, we're a church that has $350 billion, but we've spent 11,000 of that on you, and we think that's too much. We're sorry that you've been traumatized for life, but this $11,000 represents what Jesus Christ is willing to give you in order to help you heal. But you can't heal with the people you want to. You have to heal with the people that we tell you to heal with. And in addition to that, you have to sign a waiver so that we can listen in on everything you tell that person, just in case it turns out that we're liable, so we can give that information to the lawyers at Curtin McConkie so that they can claim that attorney-client privilege is more important than your therapist-client privilege or your priest-penitent privilege. So if this isn't abusive behavior, I don't know what is. And it's just the way that the church operates. Okay. And it makes me absolutely crazy that a church with $350 billion of assets is cutting people off after $11,000 of assistance. And let's be fair, it's not after $11,000 because they're offering another 6 months before they cut her off. They say down here, at the end of the 6 months, there will be an evaluation to determine if the therapy has given you the peace in your life that you're seeking. If treatment has proven beneficial to you as determined by the evaluation process of Dr. Hale, then financial support, as mentioned above, will continue for an additional 6 months. This assistance will not go beyond October 31st, 2005. So, hey, Michelle, we're really sorry that for decades, the people in the basement of the church at Bluffdale, including Bishop John Turner and Ron Jones and members of the Lions Club, ritually abused you, and it caused lifelong damage. And you've lost your husband, and you're trying to raise 4 children on your own. And we know it's really hard, but we've given you $11,000, and we are setting a deadline that if you haven't healed by October 31st, which is Halloween, a day that might be a little bit traumatic for a ritual abuse victim, but if you haven't healed by Halloween of 2005, we're cutting you off. But Sister Nielsen, we want you to know that we love you as a sister in the gospel, and we'll be praying for you. Okay, and I'm sorry. A lot of people don't like it that I get emotional about this, and they'll use it against me, right? But if you can read this and not get emotional about what's happening here, then I just think maybe you've lost the thread a little bit. And maybe you've never talked to an abuse victim, and maybe you don't know how it destroys your life, and how it destroys your mind, and how it destroys your ability to trust anybody. And maybe you just don't get that. And so maybe this just doesn't seem like a big deal to you, but I'm telling you, after working with hundreds of abuse victims, a letter like this will send you into a spiral that could very well end in your death. And it's sent by a guy who has no training, none, but is told, hey, if you screw up, good news, you've got a lawyer from the law firm Curtin and McConkie, which is staffed with some of the best lawyers in America, and we'll make sure that you don't end up being held accountable for the things that you do. Okay, so that's where we end up, is the church giving Michelle a deadline and a cap of probably $15,000, maybe a little bit more than that, in terms of what they're willing to do to help her. I need to come back here to finish a couple things off because I promised I was going to show you some things. I have a few questions that I want people to consider. The first question is this: in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the prophets are considered the judges in Israel. And I just am wondering, when is it that the judges in Israel decided that they need general counsel to protect them from the consequences of their actions? Okay. In the deposition, it says now 27 has is a more contemporary, September 24th, 2002 letter by Lance Wickman to Michelle Nielsen. Answer: yes. Question: do you know what he's saying? The First Presidency has asked that I respond on their behalf. So what you see here is a bunch of cowering prophets who utilize a lawyer to speak on their behalf so that if they say something wrong, that they won't be held legally liable for it. Okay, and this goes back to a question that I used to ask when I found out that the church was working with the CIA. What need does the CIA have with 21, 22-year-old returned missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints if the prophets are prophetic? Wouldn't the CIA want to recruit the prophets themselves? Because you could win every war, you could know where everything you ever possibly needed is. But the CIA doesn't recruit the prophets. They recruit the young men and women, the sheep in the fold of the prophets, under the auspices of the approval of the prophets, despite the fact that the prophets know that it could affect the image of the church if it's known that that relationship exists. And then it's the same thing here. If you're a prophet and you're a judge in Israel, why do you need to send a lawyer to speak on your behalf? You're the one who's supposed to judge. You're the one who's supposed to have discernment. You're the one who's supposed to be able to look at the facts and determine what it is that's supposed to happen. But these men are so scared of doing something wrong that they utilize a lawyer to go out and speak on their behalf to abuse victims, which I find pretty morally objectionable and not what I want from a leader of a church. We've already gone through these other things, so we're already up at the conclusion point of this, but it's kind of a long conclusion, and I want to go through it nice and slow. Again, if there's two things you take from this presentation, if you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I hope it's this. One is you should never go to a bishop and tell them about your abuse, because if you do, that bishop will be pressured to tell your story to a Curtin McConkie lawyer, because the church views their attorney-client privilege as above the priest-penitent privilege that you enjoy with your bishop. So anything you tell your ecclesiastical leader is going to go directly to the people who may be liable for your abuse. And you're putting yourself at a severe disadvantage by going and telling your bishop about the abuse that you suffered. So please go to the proper authorities first. Okay. The second thing I want you to take away from this is you should never, ever, ever speak to a Curtin McConkie lawyer without legal counsel present on your behalf. That Curtin McConkie lawyer is not a priesthood holder there that's there to help you. He's not your brother or sister in the gospel. He doesn't have empathy or sympathy for your case. He is a lawyer who is being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and more for people like Randy Austin, most likely, to protect the image and assets of the very people that may be liable for the abuse that you've suffered. So please never speak to a Curtin McConkie lawyer unless you have your own legal counsel present. Okay, those are the two big things. And I'm going to show you why I say those things in my conclusion. Number one, Curtin McConkie lawyers view you as an adversary, and they are not your advocate. Okay, in the deposition, it says you were looking at her as an adversary. He says, certainly that would have been part. I don't know that I could say I had a more probable than not, clear, convincing. I don't know that I had that particular standard in mind, but certainly he's talking about legal standards, like when you go to court and you're tried for something, they're always looking for a standard of evidence, and that's what he's talking about here. Did you have these standards as you were looking and doing your investigation? And he says, I don't know that I had that particular standard in mind, but certainly would have. Those standards would have been part of my consideration. Randy Austin was not there to advocate on Michelle Nielsen's behalf. He viewed her as an adversary, and he was applying standards of evidence to determine whether his client was liable and whether he should suggest to his client whether or not they should lowball her on a settlement, or whether they should kick her out and tell her that she was needing to go get therapy. Okay? So they are adversaries, not advocates. There's this lie that the church tells, and Randy Austin in particular tells when he goes out to give talks about the abuse hotline. In a newspaper article written by Tad Walsh, where Randy Austin was talking about the abuse hotline, the article mentions they reiterated several times the church's position that abuse cannot be tolerated in any form. Okay, that is a lie. The church tolerates abuse all the time, all day, every day. And in my particular case, when we called, I had my stake president call Kurt McConkie regarding the domestic violence taking place in my home. And what that Kurt McConkie lawyer told my stake president was, we don't handle that type of abuse. Okay? Meaning that type of abuse doesn't really threaten the church's image or assets. Okay, that abuse hotline is there for a very specific purpose. It's there to deal with cases which are going to harm the church's image or assets. And they tolerate abuse all day, every day, at every level of the church. Okay, and we've shown that. We've shown that with Gordon Bowen. I can show that with my case. I can show you that with 100 other cases. But when the church tells you that they don't tolerate abuse in any form, they are lying through their teeth. The lawyers at Kurt McConkie are never going to take responsibility, nor is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Okay, what they're going to do is they're going to kick this back. They're going to kick this can back down to the local level, to a bunch of unpaid, untrained, incompetent local leaders who have no ability or capacity to handle abuse cases. But this really protects the church in the sense because at that point, they can claim that the local leader is an employee of the church and provide them legal help, even though these guys aren't employees of the church per se. Okay, it says, Austin says, leaders, that's your call, just as I explained it to Michelle, and then what I was trying to explain again. No objection at church headquarters to Michelle being given counseling. Okay, so they're the good guys. The church headquarters is the good guys. We're willing to give her counseling, but it's got to go down through the local leaders. Question, so if the church per se at a higher level has no objection to her receiving counseling for this abuse, and she's related and is suffering from, why has she had problems since then with the same issue, which was supposed to have been resolved? Other lawyer objects. Randy Austin says, yeah, you would have to talk to her current bishops, her current leaders about that, right? Not my responsibility. You got to talk to the local leaders. Michelle's lawyer says, well, you were speaking for the church, were you not, when you wrote this letter in terms of the group? And Randy interrupts him and says, yes. And he says, saying there was no problem with her getting counseling she needs. And Randy again says, as approved by her bishop. Okay. You got to stop for a second and think about what it's like to be a bishop who's getting direction from the church's law firm who represents the prophet of the church. Okay. And what that direction is going to look like is, hey, Bishop so-and-so, we have somebody and we don't object to this person getting counseling, but we do want you to remember that you have a sacred duty to protect the assets of the church. Okay. And what you hear as a bishop when somebody says that is, oh, there's a limit to how much I can help here before these guys are going to see me as an incompetent leader, and I am no longer going to be considered for advancement in leadership callings. Okay, there's very real pressure on a bishop to do what Kurt McConkie is insinuating that you do so that your track in leadership continues. And I guarantee you that if you were a bishop and you wanted to help Michelle Nielsen by giving her therapy for the rest of her life, eventually you're going to get a call from Kurt McConkie or somebody in church leadership saying, Bishop so-and-so, we really love the fact that you're so empathetic towards Sister Nielsen, but do you really think it's a good use of the church's sacred funds to continue to support her, or should she be self-sufficient? That's the language that they would use. Okay. And so everybody knows this. Everybody inside the church knows this, but it's all occulted at this level of plausible deniability. Okay, where Randy Austin can say, well, it's just up to the local leaders. It's just up to the local leaders. Don't bother me about this. It's up to the local leaders. So they're never going to take responsibility, but it's a very well-oiled machine. Let's talk about the difference between coercion and consent, okay? And when is informed consent required? In the deposition, it says she also made a number of representations about the involvement of former priesthood leaders, Bishop Jones and others, and it was necessary to talk to them. And because I was sensitive, I understood that she'd been through difficult things and people had horrible reactions to what she told them. Very sensitive to that, and asked her, Michelle, do you realize when you give me these names, I'm going to call all these people? Is that okay? And then this is still Randy Austin talking. He says, he represents that she says, that's fine, absolutely fine. And then he's continuing his narrative. And he's back in his voice. He says, you don't have any objection to me calling these people? And then in Michelle's voice, he's saying no. That Michelle says no. He says, I was very explicit about that, sir. So he's getting a little bit uppity, right? I was very explicit about that, sir. She gave me the names voluntarily. I did not coerce them out of her. Okay. I will give Randy Austin the benefit of the doubt that he did not coerce them. He did not browbeat them out of her. But I would also suggest that he did not provide her informed consent as to what he was doing and what the consequences of her decision to give that consent was. And so this is another case. One of the big things that people are talking a lot about as it relates to church and the abuse is the difference between doing what's legal and doing what's moral and ethical. And the reason they're talking about that is this big case in Arizona that the church just won, in which the church argued that it's like against their religious beliefs to have to report child abuse to the authorities. And the judges came down on the side of the church in this. And everybody's like, okay, well, this is discombobulating because it might be legal, but everybody can see that that's not moral or ethical. But the only people who think that that's moral and ethical are the lawyers and the church that's responsible for the billions of dollars of damage. And it's the same thing here. You may not be coercing, you may not be browbeating a victim, but this is not a person who's necessarily in their right mind at the time that you're speaking to them. Okay. And if you're representing yourself as a priesthood holder, if you're representing yourself as representing an organization that likes to help people in your situation, and you ask for permission to talk to the people because you're representing it as though you're trying to help them corroborate their story, when in reality, you're looking for evidence that your client is not liable, I do not consider that informed consent, nor do I consider that moral and ethical behavior. And I think the lawyers at Kurt McConkie behave absolutely immorally and unethically, and particularly in this case, acted immorally and unethically as it came to this. And so if you're an abuse victim and you decide you want to go to Kurt McConkie for help, just understand that you're going to be slightly coerced, and you're certainly not going to be given the ability to provide informed consent. Let's talk about the church as a corporation. This is sort of going back to the very first thing that we talked about, which is that Michelle wanted to go and get help from a representative of the church. And Randy Austin says this over and over in the deposition, and he conflates the church and the corporation repeatedly. Okay. So the question is, did you realize that in doing so, you basically were protecting your client by finding out before the case was filed, if there were a case to be filed, all of her evidence and information? And Austin replies, I was doing what she wanted to do, which sounds an awful lot like a rapist now that I read it out loud. Okay. But he says, I was doing what she wanted to do. She wanted to present a claim to the church. Well, Randy, you are not the church. You are a lawyer for a corporation that uses the name of a church to confuse people. And you took a traumatized woman who wanted to present a claim to the church, and you represented to her that you represented to that church when you don't. You represent the corporation that represents the church. You were not doing what she wanted to do. You were doing what you wanted to do because you wanted to protect that corporation. So let's just be very clear about what happened here. And despite the fact that you told her that she had every right to get a lawyer and that she could consult with her own lawyer, you did not meet the needs of this traumatized woman who came to you seeking assistance from a church, not a lawyer representing the interest of a corporation who will do anything to protect its image and its assets. Here's this piece that I've been promising to show you, and I left it towards the very end because I need people to understand how important this is from a practical perspective, okay? The question is, what about this prospect that if there is that type of colliding privileges? Okay, and so if you're not familiar with the law system, let me just try to do this. I'm not a lawyer, and so take this for what it's worth, but inside of the legal system, there are certain relationships that even a court of law cannot penetrate. And those are called privileges. And they're the kinds of things like if you tell your wife something, they can't force your wife to testify against you. If you tell your therapist something, they can't force your therapist to testify against you. If you tell your lawyer something, they can't force that lawyer to testify against you. So you have what are called privileges. And at this point in the deposition, they're talking about colliding privileges. And the two colliding privileges they're talking about is the priest-penitent privilege and the attorney-client privilege. And Burton, Michelle Nielsen's lawyer, is asking, what about this prospect that if there is that type of colliding privileges, then does not she, meaning Michelle, have a right to know what a lawyer's conversation has been with her ecclesiastical leader about her? And Randy Austin's lawyer, Mr. Trainer, jumps in and he says, I think that's a matter for the judge in this case to decide on the evidence presented to him or her. Mr. Burton responds, well, your opinion on that is she still does not have a right to know what your conversations are with President Oveson, which is her stake president that wrote that letter. And Mr. Trainer says, our position is that Mr. Austin's conversations with her priesthood leaders is subject to the attorney-client privilege. So I know I've said this repeatedly, but I'm going to say it one more time because you have to understand these privileges are sacred inside of the American legal system. But what Kurt McConkie is arguing is that their sacred privilege of attorney-client privilege trumps your sacred privilege of when you go and talk to your ecclesiastical leader. And if that doesn't give you the willies, I don't know what would. Because what it means is that anything you tell a bishop, any sin you confess, any thought you've ever had, any vision that you think that you may have had, any spiritual experience that you've discussed, that is not between you and your bishop. That is not between you and your stake president. That is between you and your lay bishop and a lawyer representing the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that is also not informed consent, okay? If you want to talk about informed consent, never at any time did I go into a bishop's office to talk to him about the problems that I was having in my life, knowing and being told that that information could possibly go to a lawyer who represents a corporation pretending to be a church run by a bunch of frat guys who join quasi-religious secret societies that engage in humiliation rituals, shame bonding, and mental, emotional, and physical abuse. Because if you had told me that, I never would have walked into a bishop's office, and neither should you. Because that's insane. It's insane to go into an office of an ecclesiastical leader not understanding that that information could possibly go to the very people who are liable for the damage that's been caused you. Okay? But that's what it is. That is what the church will argue if you ever find yourself at odds with the church. My last point is simply this. Randy, over and over again in his deposition, says things like, she knew I represented the church. First and foremost, Randy Austin does not represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the spiritual body. He does not. And to pretend that he does is absolutely immoral and unethical on Randy Austin's part. He is not a representative of the church. He says that he doesn't mix his priesthood and his lawyer personalities or personas. So to say that he represents the church is factually incorrect. He does represent a corporation known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but lawyers love being specific. So next time you talk to an abuse victim, Randy, please be specific about who it is you represent. And please tell them, I represent a corporation that stole the name of your church and is known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Because if you say it that way, that traumatized abuse victim might walk out of your office instead of giving you their entire story on a tape recorder and allowing you to contact all the people who are going to not corroborate her story while you ignore the people who are going to corroborate her story, and then have you segregate her from the very witnesses that do corroborate her story so that she doesn't know that she has a claim against the church. So let's just be really honest about who it is we represent. And what I want people to really understand is that Randy Austin and Curtin McConkie do not represent Jesus Christ. In no world would Jesus Christ treat an abuse victim the way that Randy Austin and Curtin McConkie treated Michelle Nielsen and Gina Pemberton Johnson. In no world would Jesus Christ treat abuse victims the way that these men and women treat abuse victims. Abuse victims need pastoral care. They need healing. They need help. Sometimes they need financial compensation to put their lives back together. Jesus Christ would never do what these men and women do. So if you're an abuse victim in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I plead with you to never interact with these men and women, ever, unless you have competent legal representation on your side of the equation as well. And I think that's just where I'd like to leave it for today. Emma, any questions or comments?
It's really shocking reading that. Like I said, you hear these stories of how courts go wrong, how lawyers screw people over, just bad experiences. But to actually see how this happens behind the scenes, and to see how, like you were saying, they're separating victims that could make a difference together. Testimony can be used in a court of law, and it's much easier if you have more than one person to testify. It's a lot better. And the fact that they're keeping their stories separated, yet going to the church leaders involved with both their stories and telling them both the stories, you see the complicity of a whole group of people keeping these survivors separate. The fact that the church leaders don't see a problem with that and didn't address that first. Do these girls know of each other? You would think that would be the first thing the churches would say. Wow, you just told us 2 stories of they named the same locations. These 2 girls are alleging the same things. Did you introduce them to each other? The fact that that went through so many chains of command and authority, and everybody had that same perspective of, let's keep it quiet. You wonder how many other victims this has happened to if 2 discovered this by happenstance because they lived in the same area and ended up connecting dots together and going on a podcast and sharing things and, being able to corroborate their testimony outside of these systems. How many survivors have taken their lives and it's just been buried and they've been made to look crazy? We offered them therapy and they ended up taking their life anyways.
They drive you crazy. Then they call you crazy. Then they act like it's crazy that you kill yourself. And that's just the way that it is. They do things that drive people crazy. And then they use the way that you're behaving to discipline you and hurt you and harm you further. And then they act like it was crazy that you end up harming yourself because of the way that they treated you. It's a really, really dark circle that happens with abuse victims in the church. And I see it over and over and over again.
And even how they were wording Michelle's therapy that they're so generously offering her. First of all, if somebody went through all of that abuse, like who wouldn't be? I would be crazy. Like, I can't believe watching these girls, Michelle and Gina, take the stand on a podcast and share their story and how well put together they are for everything that they shared that they went through. The fact that they're still here. I mean, gosh, these are like brilliant people, and the fact that they're being belittled so much and treated like they actually are crazy. And you clearly need therapy. Like, that's what you need here. You don't need the other things that you're trying to get. Like, this is what you need. You clearly have some mental issues that need addressed. It's like when somebody's already spiraling so much, like you said, to be told all of that and treated like that, it's just an abomination in and of itself. Like how these victims are just plainly talked to. Like, there's not a level of even respect or compassion.
That's exactly right. And so, I mean, I don't know how we fix it. I don't know what we do, but when you have a church run by frat boys, this is about what you would expect to see. This is exactly how frats deal with abuse inside of their organizations as well. It's exactly the same. And so all I'm saying is like the church at that lowest level of like the spiritual body is a wonderful place full of wonderful people who are far more qualified to nurse these abuse victims back to health than any leader in the church, particularly any global leader of the church and their law firm ever will be. And so maybe we just need to get rid of the abuse hotline altogether. And maybe we need to put healing back where it belongs, in the hands of those who have the empathy and the sympathy and the capability of providing healing, instead of viewing an abuse victim as an adversary who's going to harm our image and assets. But I don't know. I don't have answers, and I don't pretend that I know how to fix it. I don't.
I wish that there would be courageous people in these institutions that would stand up and want to do the right thing. It's harming people, and they need to stand up.
Yeah, particularly when you claim to represent Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Like, I think that the majority of people in the world understand that the world isn't going to fix itself. Like, the world is, the world is out for itself. But when you create an organization and you claim, like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does, that you literally are led by Jesus Christ and that your leaders are in communication with Jesus Christ, there is a reasonable expectation that you will treat abuse victims as Jesus Christ would teach them. And you cannot get much further away from the standard of treating people like Jesus Christ than Kurt McConkie does in the way that they treat abuse victims. And so I don't know that it's a matter of good people versus bad people. It's about, who do you represent yourself as? So like I've always said from the very beginning, I said, anybody can say anything, but actions reveal intent. And as it relates to today's story, anybody can say that they represent the church. Anybody can say that they represent Jesus Christ. But when you act the way that Randy Austin and Kurt McConkie did in this case, everybody can clearly see that you don't represent Jesus Christ. And then you have to make a decision, because if people are saying they represent Jesus Christ, but they're not representing Jesus Christ, what does that say about the person or the institution? And those are difficult conversations, and that shakes worldviews. And those are very difficult circumstances to work your way out of, especially if you've been a member of an organization and sincerely believe that they do represent Jesus Christ. But we have to stop listening to what people claim at some point and start looking at what they do. Because real people are really being harmed. Like really being harmed, while other people are benefiting wildly off the systems that have been put into place. And I won't get into it, but I personally think the scriptures speak very openly about exactly this sort of dynamic being set up in the world. And the only remedy that I see is to stop paying attention to what people say and start paying attention to what people are doing, and make your decisions based off what they do, not what they say they are. So I don't know, Emma. I mean, it's a problem bigger than I can comprehend, and it's the only thing I know to do is to look for the people who need help and to try to provide that help in the best way that I know how, knowing that what I do makes almost no difference at all in the grand scheme of things. But to an individual here and an individual there, it seems to be helpful. And so maybe if enough of us look for the people who need help and provide the help in the ways that we can, maybe it'll be enough to heal the world enough that we can just keep going for another day or two, another month, another year, another decade. But I know that I would rather spend my time working with the one abuse victim than cleaning the church building for a $350 billion corporation. I know that with all my heart.
Would there be any benefit if anybody's listening today to this or gets shown this episode, if they have also had a bad experience with these lawyers and this same situation? Would it be helpful to you or to other victims that if they were to reach out to you? Would that be something that you would want if anybody listening has been affected?
Yes, always. So, I mean, I am beginning to hear stories of therapists who have letters written from the president of the church acknowledging that they know about the ritual abuse, but they feel like it's not time to handle it yet. But I don't have any copies of those letters. I'm hearing about other people who have had bad experiences with Kurt McConkie or church leaders at the church office building. And yeah, the more we can tell these stories, I think also like there is value. Like, I think I was just a little bit of a downer. Let's try to not end this on a downer. There is real value in telling stories, because one of the most difficult things for a victim is that they feel so alone. And the system is set up to make you feel alone. And so the more people who tell their stories, especially stories where there's documentation involved, like this story, the less alone abuse victims feel. And the more that they see that they're not crazy, the more that they see that it wasn't them that caused this, that like they were thrust into a system that they trusted but had no reason to trust. And so certainly, if you have any stories that you would like to share, if you have any documents that you'd be willing to give me, I would love to take them. And if you want me to, I'll tell your story. If you don't, I'd be happy to just take them and add them to my collection, and we can just talk. And you can just tell your story to somebody who's going to listen probably more carefully than anybody's ever listened to it in your life. And I think that's healing for everybody involved. And so, yeah, I would invite people to reach out if they have those types of stories and that type of documentation. That would be great.
And Michelle and Gina, who Justin so articulately documented their behind the scenes story of a lot of what the public didn't hear or see and go through with them, they have testimony out on We Are the People Utah podcast. And one really beautiful thing that came about this horrific tragedy that both of them separately suffered trying to get a legal representation is that now they're dear friends.
They were able to establish the reality of the tunnels that they taught about. The government, the city government, this story is so big. It goes well beyond what I've talked about today, but like the city had denied the existence of the tunnels that the girls talked about. But through going on We Are the People Utah, Jason Preston was able to work with Trent Staggs, I believe, who's the mayor out there in Bluffdale or something along those lines. I may be getting this all wrong, but the general point of it is they were able to establish that the tunnels that they claimed existed exist. Okay, but this is deep. I mean, this community of Bluffdale is a very strange community, and a lot of strange things go on out there. And so, like, it's not just the church that's involved in covering things up. It's things like the police department, and it's things like the city government.
And this is where the dogs alerted, showing that there are human remains in that space, which is now the Riverton City offices and the police station. They took the dogs and the quantum oscillator, and they also had ground penetrating radar. So they were able to actually get an image of part of the tunnels that we described. We've had a lot of flack from Riverton. They've closed the case saying that there's no evidence. They've imploded one of the main tunnels that they said didn't exist, but we do have video and pictures of that. And since going on We Are the People podcast, we've had other witnesses come forward who were in the rituals when we were children, are preparing their witness statements to give to the FBI. For some reason, I guess, Riverton doesn't think they need to investigate homicides that are related to was ritual abuse because it's all just part of satanic panic. So apparently cadaver dogs and an quantum oscillator and ground penetrating radar, and now we have 8 witnesses. 8 witnesses. Apparently not enough. Not enough. Not enough.
But because these two women came together in 2009 and then worked together for several years on this, they were able to establish a lot of things that they otherwise wouldn't have. And that all could have happened back in 2002 if Kurt McConkie hadn't kept them segregated from each other. And perhaps there would have been less time to destroy the evidence, right, that was destroyed as time goes on, because as time goes on, it gets harder and harder to prove these things, and buildings get pulled down. Like that church building no longer exists, right? New buildings get put up, fields get dug up, like things happen, evidence degrades and all that. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly that opportunity to form these communities. I don't think Michelle and Gina are working all that closely together at this particular point, but that's certainly the opportunity that's available to us, is to come together and share our stories in situations where we're not going to be labeled tragically mentally ill, even if we are tragically mentally ill. But we're gonna stand by each other and help each other work through these dark, difficult situations that we find ourselves in. So I hope more people will join with us as we continue to try to build that community.
I do too, and I completely agree with Justin that is why it's important to share testimony, even if you can't go on a public podcast, to find somebody safe or somebody like Justin who is connected to a lot of survivors. Just share with somebody that you trust or somebody that you think can maybe help you, that's not going to harm you, because you never know where that might lead. If you don't have that corroboration, if you're not getting help by authorities and you're being separated and segregated from other victims, potentially sharing your story is the one option that you have that could possibly connect you to other people. And listening to testimony of people in your area or other survivors, that is why it's so important that these testimonies are shared. It's not just healing for the person sharing it, it's also a puzzle piece for people listening. And it helps us see a greater picture, and it can be extremely corroborating. I can't even tell you on my own podcast how many times the same names, locations, this, that, the third, so many different things have popped up on all different aspects of a survivor's life that are identical, and it's incredible how that happens. And authorities didn't figure that out. It's like the survivors are doing the FBI's job for them, which is really sad, but that's what people like you, Justin, and, speaking out, all these survivors speaking out, that's really what they're doing, is like laying the groundwork of an investigation that's not happening. We're able to investigate similarities and corroborate it against each other with testimony. And so it's extremely powerful. And I would definitely encourage anybody, if you've been affected by anybody that Justin talked about today, please contact him and just connect with him. Even if you don't want your story public, as you guys can see, he does not reveal names of people who don't want their evidence to have a name to it. And even if you don't want it shown on a podcast, I know he'd respect that too, but it might help you and him, be able to put these puzzle pieces together. So the value in connecting just can't be overstated here. And Justin, where are you at on social media, and how can people connect with you?
Yep. The easiest place to find me is on X. I'm at LDS Abuse on that platform, and that's where I mostly interact with people. I do have an Instagram and a TikTok account that is at LDS Abuse on X that you can find me at. And I do respond. I'm just a little bit slower getting to those messages. And I just don't post as much. X is sort of my home, so that's the place to find me. You can also go to GordonBowenCourtDocuments.com, and there's a message box that you can ask a question or put information in there, and that will come directly to my email. So there's multiple ways to get a hold of me.
Thank you for all the work that you do. You cover things that other people don't have the courage to. And I love how you make your presentations and that you put this evidence together so we can see it. And it's just designed in such a way to where it's really easy to comprehend the person listening. And I know you must put so much work into clipping all of those little clips, those quotes, highlighting. I mean, the work that you dedicate to one of these presentations, I can't even imagine the amount of hours that it took just to do this presentation today. So thank you from the bottom of your heart for your courage to cover these topics and for giving so many people a voice who don't have one.
Thank you. I have good friends who help, and so I don't want to make it seem like I do all the work, but there is a lot of work that goes into it. And so thank you to those who don't want to be known but do help. I appreciate you so much. But yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it. And I just want to thank everybody. I know we're 2.5 hours into this, and I know that in today's world, holding people's attention for 2.5 hours is hard. And so I want to thank those who stuck with us through this. And I hope it was valuable. I hope it brought value and helped you see the world a little bit more clearly, and will help you if you ever find yourself in a position where you have to deal with these people.
I agree. And so for everybody listening, please go support Justin. I'll have all his information in the show notes. I'll have mine as well. If you guys want to be on the show, I have my emails below. You guys can also contact me on social media. If you're a survivor, whistleblower, want to share your story or just connect, I'd love to connect with you also. And obviously, if you guys have corroboration of anything that you heard today or of any Justin's episodes that he's done, please reach out to him and support him. He's very active on X, like he said, so I'm going to have that below too. Check out the Gordon Bowen documents. That's an incredible website, and go watch that episode, and I'll have his playlist below too if you guys missed any of his episodes. And we could not do this without you guys. You guys are really the backbone of this movement. You guys are the reason why our voices are even able to be heard. And you guys are the ones that keep us going. Your encouragement and your kind comments and your love and support. Sometimes it feels like we're speaking into an abyss, and then you go through the comment section and see all the ways that this is touching all of you and the way that it's helping you. And so I'm just really grateful. Thank you guys for all your encouragement on Justin's episodes too. It means the world to me to see all of that in the comments. And with that being said, you guys, thank you so much for listening. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.